Okay, right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Apologies for the slight delayed start. We're having technical difficulties, as always, but we are just about there now, I think. So thank you very much for your patience. So good morning. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Emily Sporrell. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner. We'll go around and do some introductions just so everyone knows who's here in the room. Also, as well, just to say we are joined by some new people today. So warm welcome. We've got my two new independent scrutiny advisors, John and Chris, who are joining us for the first time. So thank you very much. We've got Chris Green, who is attending as his first scrutiny meeting as Deputy Chief Constable. And then we've also got Mark Cameen, who's attending as his first meeting as temporary ACC for investigations. So very warm welcome to you. So if we do introductions, so Jeannie.
Good morning, I'm Deputy Police Crime and Commissioner Jeannie Bell.
Hi, I'm John Wise. I'm one of the two new OPC independent scrutiny advisors.
Hello, and I'm Chris Shaw, the other independent scrutiny advisor.
Hi, John Riley, Chief Finance Officer for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Good morning, Sue Taggart, Chief Executive for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Good morning. Oh, apologies. What are we going on?
Good morning, Kim Dawson, Scrutiny and Improvement Officer at the PCC.
If I just bring the Chief who's joining us online, Chief Constable Serena. Sorry, we saw your lips move, but we didn't hear the sound, but we'll fix that while we do the rest. So, Paul.
Good morning, Paul White. I'm ACC with Portfolio for Contact, Response and Matrix.
Good morning, Assistant Chief Constable Jenny Sims. I'm the ACC for People Services.
Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Cameen, Temporary ACC for Investigations and Intelligence.
Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. Chris Green, Deputy Chief Constable.
Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. Matt Smith, Temporary Chief Superintendent for Prevention.
Morning, everyone. Amanda Ross, Principal Strategic Analyst with Merseyside Police. Thank you.
Good morning, Keith Dickinson, Director of Resources at Merseyside Police.
Good morning, everybody. Zoe Thornton, Head of Local Policing.
Okay, thank you very much. So if we... and before we start, it's probably just worth noting as well that obviously it was announced... put my teeth back in. It was announced last week that our Chief Constable has been awarded a KBM. So congratulations to Serena for that. Very well deserved. And yes, very good. Okay, right, if we move on then, so we've got actions from the last meeting. There were two actions, I believe, that we're going to come back to a future meeting. The first was around, it was discussed around additional checks on police officers had been mandated by the Home Office following the case of David Carrick at the Met. I know Merseyside were provided with their data at the last meeting and it was too early to talk about what the data will say. And it was agreed that there'd be an update at a future meeting. So I don't know if, Chris, are you ready to do a quick update on that?
Yeah, so we're not in a position to provide an update at this meeting. The review, obviously you are aware that the historic data wash was all completed in line with the national requirements. We're at the review stage, and that review and research stage now won't be completed until the end of the summer. So I suggest that we forward that to the next scrutiny meeting when we'll be in a better position to provide the update.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, Chief, did you want to come in on that? Oh, hang on, one sec. I think we're struggling with your sound. So, sorry, Serena, 1 second. We're just making sure we can hear you. You might have to type it in the chat.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. There you are.
So, obviously, because this is a piece of work I'm leading on nationally, we won't be in a position to discuss any results nationally until the new year. Chris has obviously given you the Merseyside position as to where we're up to, but then it will need to go into a scrutiny meeting, I would suggest, in Q4 of this year.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, and then the second action... Oh... Okay. So the second action then was around Merseyside Police to outline the work they're carrying out to deliver against the MPCC National Road Policing Strategy. Paul, have you got an update for this?
Yes, Commissioner. Clearly, I could probably talk at some length in relation to what we're doing. I know you are cited, or have been cited, in terms of our approach to roads policing. I suppose just to summarise, our commitment to deliver the national strategy is being achieved through the delivery of Vision Zero, which, as you know, is the new methodology that underpins Liverpool City Region Road Policing Strategy and the Merseyside Police Roads Policing Strategy, and with our aim to achieve 0 road deaths on the road by 2040. So just so we're absolutely clear in terms of the consistency between the two strategies, the National Road Policing Strategy has 5 key areas, which is policing our roads together, preventing harm and saving lives, tackling crime, driving technology and innovation, and changing minds. So similarly, Vision Zero works upon having 5 pillars that are around having safe streets, safe speeds, safe vehicles, safe behaviours, and then post-collision response, so a clear overlap between the two. And just to give a little bit of narrative around those particular or bespoke pillars, in terms of safe streets, that's the work we're doing to encourage and implement lower speeds approach to the street. So that's supporting street design and using schemes such as the Safer Roads Watch. It gives more cohesive approach across all the strands within Merseyside Police towards the enforcement of emerging limits to reduce dangerous activity and promote safe active travel. In terms of our safe speeds, so that's the continuation of the community-led, citizen-focused approaches to offences, contrary to the aims of active travel. So, you know, that permanent parking, zigzags, obstruction of cycle lanes, etc. So, targeted enforcement, tackling drivers who break the law and commit offences and crimes that result in death or serious injuries on the road. So, a lot of community-based activity supported by our roads policing officers and local policing teams. An example of that is that we took part in the National MPCC Speed Enforcement Operation, and we can obviously deliver more detailed information about the numbers of offences detected, etc., in due course. The safe vehicles work, so that's through analysis, looking at trends involving vehicles and the use of that data to shape enforcement, and working with partners to look at innovative ways to utilise technology to prevent harm to road users. So that's the continuation of the partnership operations, so the taxi enforcement work, the commercial vehicle unit, and the DVSA operations. A lot of work around safe behaviours, so direct tackling of high-risk behaviours, irrespective of the mode that can be attributable to road danger, so starting with those that contribute most to collisions. So we use the enforcement data to target high-risk locations and where we see high-risk behaviour, and then we put in visible reassurance to the residents and localised interventions. There's the new driver awareness course that provides education opportunities, positively influencing driver behaviour for the future, and a lot of use of social media in relation to that. So again, the direct correlation between enforcement and education. Lots of operations, Project Edward, the National Two Wheels Operation, Operation Safe Pass, Bike Safe, and Operation Limit, all around changing behaviour to people driving on the roads. And then the post-collision response, so learning from collisions and investigations, how they occurred, working with local partners, including the Road Safety Partnership and victims' charities, to provide the best justice and outcomes to victims. So, for example, our traffic managers would revisit the scenes of where collisions have occurred, identify the causation information, work with local highways officers, and then put in instant remedies to try and prevent that happening. So again, taking a really preventative approach to roads policing. So in summary, Commissioner, that's some update in relation to how we're working locally, consistent with the national strategy.
Great, thank you. And I know we have had a scrutiny meeting that's particularly focused on roads policing as well, so I'm sure we'll come back to all of the detail there. Thank you for that. Okay, so if we move on now then on to item 3, so this is the data dashboard. So those of you who are new to scrutiny meeting will, just to give you some background, we asked for this as a bit of a snapshot because we want to go into a deep dive at these meetings, but we also want to keep a sight of the broader picture of crime across Merseyside. So this hopefully gives us an idea as to where we are seeing some trends, either positively or negatively, that we want to have a discussion about. So Amanda, do you want to talk us through it?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So I don't intend to go through all of the dashboards, obviously, but I will pick out some exceptions if that's okay. So the first exception related to our 101 non-emergency calls answered within that 60-second window, which year-end 2022-23 was at 56.4%. From a national perspective, it's not possible to compare our 101 performance, albeit we can compare the 999 calls performance nationally. We don't have the same facility with 101, but we've also got some mitigating processes in place to deal with the performance in that particular area. Before I move on, are there any questions around that 101 call performance?
Thanks, Amanda. Is there any update then since the last meeting around improving the SLA in the time taken to answer 101 calls?
Yeah, Commissioner, so the year-to-date shows that the 101 call performance has reduced 15%, as you rightly indicate. Last year, same period, 68% to 53%. I suppose I ought to highlight at this point the emergency treble 9 performance has increased by 1% during that period, so it's not all bad news, if that's a fair reflection. I suppose I ought to make the point that the SLA is self-imposed. There's no national SLA around 101 performance, so we put 60 seconds as a measure in relation to that. During the first 2 months of the performance year, April and May, there was an increase of nearly 2,500 calls into the contact centre, which obviously have an impact on our ability to answer all calls during that period. So the focus is obviously on improving emergency call performance, but also reducing the level of abandoned calls on the 101 system, so that if you have an excessive wait on 101, you then put the phone down and pick up the 999, which therefore has an obvious impact. The average time to answer on 101 is 2 minutes and 30 seconds, so that's still, I would say, a fair indicator of performance, that in terms of we're not meeting 60 seconds as much as we'd like, but I think 2 minutes and 30 seconds is probably a fair measure in terms of how we are performing. A lot of this is obviously around demand, but it's also our ability to meet demand, so we're looking to increase our recruitment to maintain staffing levels. This is a challenge. We're not particularly competitive in terms of our pay scales, and obviously some of the risk that's associated with the calls that our staff, they do a fantastic job, but obviously they're dealing with a lot of risk in relation to the nature of the job. But we've got 5 new call handlers in training. The current recruitment process is now at vetting and medical, so the aim is to put 16 new call handlers on the course for the end of July, and then there'll be an enhanced advertising campaign in August for the projected intakes in November, and then for February next year. And then once we get to that budgeted establishment, it's then the development of the digital desk. So that is obviously to take some of the demand out of telephony and deal with that more effectively in terms of digital. And then if we can recruit into those digital posts, it will reduce the number of occasions when call handlers have to be abstracted to carry out that digital role, and they can concentrate on the primary contact through telephony. So a lot of work ongoing. We recognise some of the challenges, and we're doing everything we can to address them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of crimes, we ended the year with a 2.4% increase in crime compared to the year before. We had experienced increases in domestic abuse, other sexual offences and harassment, albeit none of these were in alert statistically, but we are in line with the national group as well. So in terms of our crimes solved rates, and comparing the 21-22 period, we finished this latest financial year with an increase in solved outcome rates for all the categories listed within that PCC dashboard, with the exception of theft from person, which experienced a marginal decrease from 2.41 to 1.98. Within that dashboard as well, we've made reference to the specified information order. You can see that there's been increases in both homicide and firearms discharges there. We are able to look at homicide categories against the most similar force data, and just for information for the public, our most similar forces are Cleveland, GMP or Greater Manchester Police, West Midlands, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire and Northumbria. And for data up to the December 22 period for the full year, calendar year, our homicide rate per million population is 20.4 against a national average of 10.7. But in terms of our most similar forces, our most similar force average rate was 15.5, and we currently sit at second in our group of 7. We currently can't compare firearms discharges occurrence nationally, albeit it hasn't been asked for at this particular forum, but we can compare gun crime, albeit I haven't got that data with me today.
Okay, questions? Jeannie?
Thank you for that. That was really helpful, especially around the comparative data with other forces. That was really useful. Just a couple of questions, really. Couple on the solved outcome rates, and then I've got a couple on the specified information order. So it's great to hear that there's been an increase in the number of positive outcomes. What do you think is causing that? What do we attribute to that? And also, do we still have vacancies in terms of the investigation strand?
Deputy Commissioner. So in relation to, I'll start with our vacancies. We do still have a number of vacancies within the investigations portfolio, i.e. our PIP2 detectives, so our trained detectives, and they number in the region of around 160. However, the force has done a great deal of work to mitigate against that, starting with freezing those vacancies to pay for our PSIs, so our police staff investigators, who often are formally accredited PIP2 investigators themselves that have retired. So that puts an immediate workforce in place. Beyond that, then, what we've looked at is the ways that we can bring investigators in. So we do have a route for our own staff to become investigators, which is called our AIDS programme, which the Chief Constable has agreed now can be funded. So there's a monetary incentive for staff to move from the likes of local policing, response and resolution into investigations. There is a financial incentive for that, to make that as attractive as possible. Beyond that, the Chief Constable has also introduced around 2 years ago now our direct entry detective programme. So the first time that the force has had anything like this, your previous route to becoming an investigator would be you'd join the police through your normal routes. You'd maybe spend a number of years at response and resolution, local policing, or in a uniform posting, and then come through into investigations at a later point. Our direct entry scheme allows now members of our community to apply directly to be an investigator, to be a detective, straight from the off, and they join under a slightly different entry route. You do have to have a degree. You are then on an 18-month programme, and then you move directly into the investigating setting. Really, really pleased to say that we've had 160 people join through that recruitment process. They're not all in place at the moment. They're going through their training or waiting to join the police. But what that does mean for us is that by December 2025, we believe that we will have all of our full-time accredited detectives in post and largely trained as well. So a really positive position for us in the medium to long term. In the short term, we're still using police staff investigators to mitigate that vacancy rate. Just in terms of those outcomes that you talked about, really good to see the movement that we've had over the last 12 months in terms of the increase of those outcomes by rate and by volume as well, which is complemented by a reduction in some of our crimes as well, which is our preventative approach, which I know you know, which is also having a really positive effect. There's a huge amount of work around making sure we get really good quality from those people who are responding at the front end, making sure that they're actively supporting our golden hour principles, so securing and preserving evidence, so that when it comes through to the investigator, they have a fighting chance to detect that, and a great deal of work around the quality of what those investigators do as well. So every month, we dip sample 150 cases that the investigations team have been dealing with to make sure that there is really effective victim support, victim engagement, that supervisor reviews are taking place on a regular basis, and there's plenty of movement and traction around those key investigations. So that, coupled with that one-team approach and our preventative approach, has meant we've seen some increases in that time period around our outcomes.
Thank you. And I suppose that links quite nicely, really, to the question that I wanted to ask on the specified information orders, which is, do we understand why, in this section, why there's been an increase in certain crime types? So do we understand that?
Yeah, we do, and certainly from the notes that I've gone through here in preparation for the meeting, obviously one of those crime types is firearms discharges. I can report that we've had an increase of 3 last year to the year before. I just feel we need to put some context around that. So Merseyside is experiencing at the moment its lowest firearms discharge rate for 21 years. We last year had 42 discharges, and I'll come on to the impact in a moment of those. The year before we had 39. If I go back 4 years and beyond that, the force and the region was experiencing anywhere between 85 and 100. So some significant reductions in threat, harm and risk, impact on our communities and impact on policing's time and indeed all the emergency services, particularly health. We've managed to sustain that for the last 3 years now, so this wasn't just a COVID blip, if you will. We've managed to keep those numbers down. I mentioned impact a moment ago. I think it's absolutely right that whilst we're talking about being the lowest in 21 years, significantly reduced and sustained, we all know the events of August last year, the terrible events, and of course throughout the whole of last year we had 5 firearms-enabled homicides. Therefore, the force absolutely accepts that whilst there's a great deal of positive work to get those numbers down to where they are and sustained, we've still got lots of work to do when we've got people dying because of firearms discharges, particularly children, women. The final point to make on that is this year, if we just look right up to live time, 2023, this calendar year, so far we've had 8 discharges in the force. Last year, which was still a very low year for us, we'd had 24 at this point. So we're seeing still significant reductions there. And in terms of homicide, which is another one that has seen a slight rise, more than a slight, sorry, it's had a rise of 7 from last year. So we had 26 last year against 19, the year before. Again, as I've just talked about, that year we didn't have any homicides related to firearms. We just had the 5, which automatically moves those numbers slightly higher. What I would say is we do understand the profile of our homicides. We've engaged with the HMIC in a recent homicide prevention summit. We know that our key drivers are around domestic, serious violence and knife crime, and the force works very, very hard then to mitigate against those threats, which I can come on to if there's any more questions if you need to.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. We'll move on then. And next item then is going to be around emerging issues. So this is an opportunity for us to reflect on anything that's happened since the last time we met in this forum. And obviously it's been a busy period as usual. So a couple of things to reflect on. Eurovision, obviously a big policing operation. Feedback I've had has been incredibly positive around how it was all managed and obviously the positive outcomes that we saw from that. I suppose a couple of questions in terms of if the Chief or someone can comment on how that was put together and the successes of the event, but also if anybody could give an indication around the costs of that and how that's been managed.
Commissioner, I'm happy to just give an update in relation to that. So, yeah, I think I absolutely share your reflection in terms of a fantastic event for the city, for the local community, and certainly from a policing perspective, we were very happy to contribute and support the event organisers to deliver a fantastic and, I guess most importantly, a safe and secure event for the people who attended. So just a bit of a flavour. So over the 9-day period where the operation was live in the city, obviously hundreds of thousands of increased visitors into the city. We only had 40 additional crimes in that particular in the areas where we had the event would have taken place. 58% of those were drugs possession. There were no knife crimes recorded, no gun crimes recorded. There were no offences of violence with injury. Arrests 10 in total over that whole period. So again, I would say that's a really positive, in fact, that we had no significant crime and disorder issues whatsoever. There were no significant related crimes in terms of there was no CT threat, any disruption to local community disorder or any community tensions identified. So really positive operation from that perspective. Debrief is in place now. So we've got a police-only and multi-agency debrief this week, looking to learn lessons from the event. Really positive developments in terms of our policing response to some of the issues that are more attuned with policing, public order, public safety events now. So our response to cybercrime, clearly on the basis we're hosting this event on behalf of Ukraine, that brought with it complexity and threat that we probably haven't experienced particularly before. Drones, again, that's real in terms of modern context to those type of operations and protest as well. So as a result of Eurovision, we have learned a lot about our capability and where we can draw capability from in the future. And we've invested to enable us to protect ourselves as an organisation when we put similar events on in the future, particularly the cyber element to that. So there's been overwhelmingly positive feedback from the host broadcaster, the EBU, the BBC. Obviously, the work we've done with the culture and the local authority, really positive. And again, most importantly, really positive feedback from public and communities about the whole event in general. So really happy with the way the operation went.
And do we have an indication of the costs of policing it?
Yes, I can provide. So it's cost us in total £3 million to police. So we could break that down to £2.2 million of that is recoverable through Home Office special grant bid, which is in the process of taking place now. And there's some opportunity. The balance is opportunity cost. That's where we've had to devote people such as planners to that event and not in a position to backfill that. But as you can see, we will be able to reclaim the vast majority of the money in terms of expense to the public purse.
Great, and I think I would echo that. I think the feedback from the public has been very positive around how the police approached the whole, 10 days of activity. So I think very welcome indeed. So the next then emerging issue, one of the things I wanted to highlight was the head of HMIC, who will be familiar as a former Chief Constable here in Merseyside. So Andy Cutt released his State of Policing report, which talked about a number of things, but including that piece around trust and confidence in policing. And I just wondered whether, again, Chief Constable or anyone in the team could reflect on how Merseyside is continuing that work to build the trust and confidence in Merseyside specifically. Who's Deputy Chief? Oh, yeah, Serena. Oh, sorry, one sec, Serena. We need the sound up again, don't we? Okay.
As you know, Commissioner, I've been very clear since becoming the Chief the priority I've placed on improving the trust and confidence in the communities of Merseyside. Pleased to say that from the surveying that we've done, the confidence of our communities is at 80% compared to a much lower figure nationally, and that's surveying that's been done by an independent company. Recognising there are some other figures within that surveying that we definitely want to improve on. That's why much of the work that we've done in relation to community engagement, in relation to our investment through Operation Uplift has all been into frontline policing and the creation of some new neighbourhood teams, and we're going to come on to it as well, the work around prevention. Our focus on clear, hold, build, but also our focus on inclusion, which again we're going to come on to today. And then coming into this new financial year and recognising the Reshaping the Future strategy that we've developed, which is the final 2 years of the existing force strategy. Again, what I have said is I've been very clear that our number one priority has to be improving that trust and confidence, and it underpins everything that we are seeking to achieve. So all of the force vision, the objectives and the commitments that I have implemented with the senior team to make sure that we deliver against your police and crime plan. That underpinning piece has to be about improving trust and confidence, because without that we won't deliver on any of the others. So they say there was an awful lot of activity going on across all of the Chief Officer team's portfolios to make sure that we are seeking to improve that trust and confidence.
Great, thank you for that, Chief. Any other comments, anyone? No? Yes?
Thanks, PCC. Commissioner, just in relation to that survey, just for understanding how that's being governed, we've got a meeting that takes place, which is user insight, which used to just look at crimes and feedback from victim surveys. That's been extended now to actually look at the confidence survey as well. So that's a quarterly meeting which is headed up by myself, with attendance right across each of the departments across the force. We are looking at replicating that perception survey and looking to try and get a bit of a deep dive into each locality area, so there's something more transactional that we can do at a local level. That will obviously then be shared through the local safety community partnerships.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then final emerging issue, Jeannie, do you want to raise?
Thank you. We know it's been a difficult few months around ensuring the safety and security of asylum seekers across Merseyside, but also improving community cohesion. And I just wanted to ask, what work are you doing and delivering to improve that across Merseyside at the moment?
Yeah, thank you. So after we had the incident at the suite, you'll be well aware, and obviously that the Commissioner chaired a meeting with each of the local authority key leads and local MPs around the nature of the events at that location and obviously the potential for wider. I think it's fair to say a lot of activity was taking place well before those events happened, which we are very fortunate that that was the case, because actually in terms of local resilience and work with the partnerships, that was already well and truly embedded. The challenges we've got around that is the addressing of misinformation, which remains still a challenge to the force, and not just the force nationally. But our commitment is to report accurately on those cases where we can do, and obviously pursue the offenders in relation to those events. So notably at the incidents at the suites, clearly an extensive investigation in relation to those there, with some positive outcomes on the back of it. We had another incident that happened a couple of weeks ago at Liverpool, down at another location, I won't give the location at the moment, which was really promptly addressed, and the situation negated quite quickly in terms of it potentially being against actually asylum seekers or proactive activity in terms of social auditors, which is what it transpired to be. I think it's fair the local community engagement unit, obviously led by Matt, works extensively with the local police and teams to ensure that there is a join-up. So at each of the premises, key premises we've got across Merseyside, I'm not saying there's daily contact, but I'd say there's absolutely definitely every couple of days contact with our key locations. The wider challenge, as we're aware, is obviously the future plans for any settlements. And obviously there's been a couple of schemes that Merseyside with local authorities have really kind of stood up to give our concerns about potential other locations, and probably just leave that bit here. It is a challenge. We expect it to continue to be a challenge. But in terms of local support and, again, action through the local safety partnerships, that's really key. So I can say from a Liverpool perspective, which is my current lead role, a lot of activity through the Community Safety Partnership and the department through Safer Communities.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So I think we'll move on now then. And we've covered the majority of the emerging issues. And we're going to talk about preventative policing. So this is something that, as the Chief Constable alluded to, is a key part of the work that Merseyside is trying to deliver. So, Matt, I think you're going to take us through this.
Commissioner, thank you. So just to give an update really in relation to where we are as a force for the new approach, or a reinvigoration of an approach with a direct emphasis upon prevention. So as you know, I think Andy Ryan came last year and discussed what the plan was in relation to what the prevention strand would look like. So purpose of this update will to let you know where we are and where we are then for a preventative approach going forward. So effectively 10 months now since we've been established as a strand dedicated resource within Merseyside Police, and it's been a realignment of a number of other resources, but also an enhancement of certain aspects of our preventative approach. We launched on 3 separate platforms. As you know, Commissioner, you were there on each of them. We did a partners event at Liverpool Museum. We did the community launch out in Knowsley, and then we had an internal launch at Rose Hill, which all took place effectively to try and build the culture, one within the organisation, but then across the partnership to be able to a face to the name and basically embed what our approach would be, but build on those relationships which are already there. So the next slide is just the alignment really of all the resources there. So as you can see, they are built now within the force structure. The only one which sits separately to those is the evidence-based policing approach. That sits within our CSD department, which Mandy works within. However, there's a direct link up between our problem-solving team, so we're working with academia to link up what evidence and what academic research can be ongoing, which will link directly within to our problem-solving approach, put the two together to actually do the things which matter to our communities, and then be able to have clear deliverables, tapping into that really wealth research projects which are ongoing at the moment. We've also built, as you can see, within our operation interface teams, just probably for people who may not know online, Project Medusa, looking at our county lines response, which we're leading on nationally, Project Adder, which is our drugs response, and then Operation Target to tackle our serious violent crime. So we'll just go on to what the prevention strategy is. So this mirrors the national strategy, which, as you know, the Chief Constable leads upon, and our approach is reflective of what the national strategy is. So underpinned within the 4 pillars of that, which are cultural change, reducing harm, reducing offending, and reducing the demand through an evidence-based problem-solving approaches. So in relation to cultural change, that is ongoing still within the force to ensure that everybody takes that preventative policing approach. So just by way of an example, that is a police officer attending a 999 call for a particular instance, but whilst they're there dealing with that in a family setting, they may see other signs of harm or other signs of issues that that family may have that actually we can look to try and prevent going back again, try and solve and direct those people into the right place for the relevant support, which will do a couple of different things. One, it will absolutely give the best possible service to our communities, but it will then impact upon policing demand, because we shouldn't then need to revisit that home over and over again. So that's what we're currently still working through, and lots of different projects ongoing now within prevention and working with all the strands of Merseyside Police to embed that going across. And obviously the other areas I'll touch on as we go through in relation to what our strategic priorities are. So I'll just go through to what those strategic priorities, and I won't read all of them out, I'll just pick out a couple if that's okay. So in relation to cultural change, obviously we've discussed regionally and nationally around the trauma-informed practice throughout the organisation. We are still working through that. We've recently had a pilot, Commissioner, led through yourself and the Chief as the VRP, as to how we are then going to try and embed a trauma-informed approach. Bernardo's have done some research for us and have reported back in on key themes for that trauma-informed approach, and we're just now working within the VRP, but what is the best possible response to our communities as a partnership. Now that may be a tiered approach, so all different parts of the partnership may get a different type of training, but effectively what we're trying to do is trauma-informed approach when we actually speak and engage with our communities, but also internally within all of our organisations, how we are across the workforce, and we're looking at working through that. If I pick up on the last one, and the Chief Constable has just mentioned it there, so developing relationships with communities and partners, increasing our legitimacy. I know, Commissioner, you're aware, but we have the Public Encounters Group, we have public scrutiny panels, which meet regularly now to go through a number of the issues and present certain, and we'll come on to stop search, but present certain instances where police have interaction with our members of the community and seek that feedback, and then we use that within our training and development of our processes for as we go through. But I'll touch on that a little bit later on if that's okay. Just in relation to reducing harm, I'll just pick the first one, reduce the frequency and duration of harmful missing episodes. So as you know, I think you visited the new missing persons team. We've reorganised what our missing persons team looks like, and that means there's dedicated resource, both a desk-based response within our education and care home settings, and then also our locate officers who are going out and actually finding those missing people, as well as a completely new team looking at preventing those people going missing in the first place and how we can remove those drivers which are potentially impacting upon people missing. I'll just go through to the reducing offending and reducing demand. So just in relation to reducing offending, and particularly focus on young people entering the criminal justice system, we've got within, I think it's Sefton now, Operation Inclusion, which is all about addressing the drivers, particularly around young persons offending for knife crime, and how we can divert that, and that's looking at the right person, dealing with that young person to remove those drivers to commit that crime in the first place, rather than potentially punitively putting them through a criminal justice system and not having the best outcome for them in our communities. And then looking at the opportunity for offending and enabling communities safeguarding themselves, we have a really embedded now neighbourhood watch, as you know, and I know that's part of your funding offer. Last week I think it was launched, but we've also got the DOCUs, so the Design Out Crime Unit, which we'll put direct into localities to look at it, but also how we can then look at the physical aspect of our community and make it as safe as possible. And then reducing demand, just two of a touch on enhancing that multi-agency data sharing. Obviously, you're aware we've improved the offer around Operation Encompass. I think one of the first forces now to move forward with a different approach with Operation Encompass, which is about the notification through to schools for young people who may have been involved or may have been in a household with domestic abuse. We're now looking at taking that one step further and exploring how we can potentially notify schools around missing episodes, having direct contact with schools. And we've worked really well now with lots of schools to have dedicated email addresses so the notification doesn't get lost with named individuals, for instance, to be able to put a wraparound. And that's about that child coming into school the next day. Teachers, caregivers, knowing that the child has suffered some sort of incident like before, and being able to provide that reassurance, but also the space for the child, knowing that that child may be not okay, and just taking a different approach when they're dealing with them. And then, obviously, we've got hotspot policing in relation to the high harm, high crime areas, which we can talk about in relation to serious violence. I was going to move on, Commissioner, if that's okay, in relation to county lines. Merseyside, obviously, one of the key areas in relation to county lines and the exporting of that crime type across the country, but also we have internal county lines. So last year we closed 419 county lines. That was exceeded what the Home Office had asked of us. They'd asked for 400 lines. So the impact of all of those lines is not just necessarily the closure of the line, it's the prevention of the line reopen for drugs to be continue to be sold again. So we've got a full wraparound of what interventions we put in place to make sure that doesn't take place. And probably just to put it into context, 219 of those 419 lines were actually closed within Merseyside, and 200 of the lines were actually other parts of the country which have a Merseyside footprint. Of those, 100% of those arrested were charged, and of those, 100% were convicted as well. So it really is making an impact on the individuals there. Our target now this year, set by the Home Office, is the closure of 280 lines this year, 23 to 24, with a focus, if we can, around modern-day slavery and human trafficking, to look at that vulnerability which sits on those crime types. And the Home Office are specifically asking if we can look at slavery trafficking protection orders and slavery trafficking risk orders. And we'll look to build on the early successes we're having around serious violence reduction orders and be able to put the two together if we can.
So this next slide reflects performance in relation to the areas, obviously, that Matt has spoken about there. So that first graph shows the volume of knife crime victims under 25 who attended or were admitted to hospital. The visual to the right shows the volume of knife crime victims under 25 and over 25. So if we just start with that left-hand visual there, this shows a downward trend up to December 22, which had the lowest number of under 25 knife crime victims with 25. Jan and February 23 have had increases in the under 25 victim volume with 31 and 35, but this is in correlation with the overall knife crime trend that has also seen increases in the last couple of months. However, financial year comparisons, so 21-22 compared to 22-23, show a 20% decrease in under 25 knife crime victims, with 101 less victims, from 505 to 404. And financial year comparisons also show a decrease of 16.9% in knife crime offences, with 208 less offences. So that's 1229 compared to 1021. So staying on this graph, the sharp object attended under 25 volume is represented by the orange line. This shows the 12-month trend for under 25 victims who've attended hospital via emergency department for a sharp object assault. Weapons for sharp object assault include bottles, glass, knives and other bladed sharp objects. The trend's fairly stable, with spikes in May and November 22. Comparing financial year to date 21-22 with 22-23, April to February, there's been a decrease of 8.8%, so that's 68 versus 62, or 6 less under 25 victims. The grey line on this graph reflects the volume of sharp object individuals admitted under 25, and this shows the 12-month trend for under 25 victims who have been admitted to hospital bed for treatment via the emergency department following a sharp object assault. Numbers are minimal, with no under 25 victims being admitted between December 22 and February 23. Comparing financial year to date 21-22 with 22-23, just for that April to February, there has been a decrease of 40%, so that's 10 versus 6 or 4 less victims. Just of note, in the majority of cases, injured persons are discharged with no follow-up. Others are admitted to a bed, refuse treatment, or are often referred to another clinic and another professional to deal with the injury. Just some additional notes for context, really. March had seen an increase in knife crimes and under 25 victims. That increase was driven by knife-enabled robbery, personal robbery offences, accounting for about 52.4% of all knife-enabled serious violence in March. Under 25 victims, which is the red line, there were 47 under 25 victims in March, in which 14 resulted in an injury from a blade or sharp object. One included a needle spiking offence. And injury is based on the assessment of our crime notes that are available to us at the time. Financial year comparisons show decrease in all knife-enabled serious violence offences except robbery personal, which is experiencing a 2.1% increase.
So, just to clarify on that bit then, we're saying that in those last few months, in the last few months, we've seen a slight increase in knife crime, but we haven't seen the same spike in terms of individuals actually going to hospital. That's continued to go down.
Correct.
So they're being used, but they're not being used in a way that's necessarily injuring younger people so much.
Yes.
Okay.
Or they are not attending hospital.
Or they're not attending hospital.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Matt?
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So just the last slide in relation to preventative police and the HMIC expectations. If I focus on the last point really around what our community engagement is and what we are enhancing at the moment. So as you know, we have PEG, which is Public Encounters Group. That meets bi-monthly at the moment, and we have different themes which go into that group. Last week, I don't know if you saw, we actually put it on Twitter what the results of PEG were, and that is effectively anybody can ask to sit on our Public Encounters Group, and we will randomly select and put together for instance, this month it was Stop Search, and we will allow it's normally the MIAG chair will walk through what the instance is, and then we ask for feedback as it goes along. That way we will unpick some of the key themes within that encounter, positive and developmental, and then those developmental things we will take direct to the officers and their supervisors, but also it will inform what our training package will be. So what we've started to do already through some of those feedback sessions is be able to redevelop what our Hydra, which is our immersive learning exercises for our staff at the front end, going out, speaking to our communities, engaging in those Stop Search. So we use it as a learning tool to make sure that everybody is then aware of the perception and actually language and how they're using their powers. We also have public scrutiny panels, which are every 6 weeks, and we have MIAG, obviously, which is our Merseyside Independent Advisory Group. At the moment, that meets bi-monthly, but we're looking at trying, if possible, to increase the frequency of that. And again, speaking about key issues which are affecting communities, bringing it into prevention, and then it's then disseminated across the force and used, as I said, exactly the same as some of the feedback from PEG.
Great. Thank you very much for that, and a really welcome presentation. And although I think it's early days, I think it's really reassuring to see that approach being taken to try and prevent that crime from happening in the first place. Do you have any sense as to how you are going to measure the success of the approach? Because obviously it's a hard thing to measure when something doesn't happen.
Yeah, it is really tricky at the moment, and there is lots of national conversations the Chief are leading on what the performance framework around preventative policing should look like. There are things which we can measure numerically, so we are looking at developing within Merseyside both a qualitative and a quantitative measure. So we've got stories which we can absolutely say the quality that it's adding to people's lives and the impact it's making. And then what we'll look at is where we can and where we should put numerical measures to it, we will. For instance, around certainly missing episodes, how often does an individual go missing, how long they're missing for, then what intervention we can put in place, and does that reduce then? And then it reduces demand. If you look at a public health approach, it will then affect all different aspects of public service as well as the individual.
Great. Okay. Jeannie?
Thank you. Just briefly wanted to kind of really welcome the rural wildlife team that's been created. Myself and the Police and Crime Commissioner spent some time with them it's about 2 months ago, Emily. It was fascinating, and I think the potential for that team in terms of prevention is huge. I know the area that I live in, which is St Helens, as is quite a large rural community. A lot of people don't realise that actually, in terms of Merseyside as a whole, we've got a large rural community. They're really going to add value, so I'm looking forward to seeing the work that they bring forward. I guess the question that I want to ask is how you, and the public will want to know this as well, preventative policing is brilliant, and response is really important. So how are you balancing the resource that's needed for prevention with the resource that's needed for response?
So our force structure and our force demand profile allows us to do that in relation to working together, but it's working across the different departments as well. So albeit we have ring fence officers around prevention, it doesn't mean that they aren't then looking at what a response should look like. For instance, our community engagement team only last week responded to an incident because they were nearby, and they're all operationally deployed. Just picking up on Royal Wildlife Heritage team, if I could, because that's probably a prime example around that balancing. They have 57% of Merseyside is rural. There are issues within or exploitation of that community by serious and organised crime individuals. So therefore, the enhancement of that absolutely directly impacts upon Merseyside's response in relation to serious and organised crime as well. So that's how we are, I suppose, working across the teams to make sure that we balance prevention and that instance to respond to. But I suppose it's really important, isn't it, to step forward. If we don't take a preventative approach, that demand's only going to increase, and that's where we need to get into the area, and that's where that's part of the development of Strand, to be able to look ahead into the future to make sure that we are getting it upstream of that demand and try and reduce it, but actually reduce that harm.
And Commissioner, maybe I'll just add on in terms of a specific example, and it becomes live investigation, so I won't go into the detail of it, but in terms of that mindset across the organisation to get people understanding and thinking about prevention at the early stage, whilst absolutely we are relentless in terms of our pursuit of organised crime, those involved in firearms offences. So the weekend, for example, we had staff out in one of the serious violence hotspot areas, proactive policing, using of stop search capabilities, 3 individuals who were stopped in possession of a sawn-off shotgun, along with other items. Now that is prevention at its core, alongside that relentless pursuit of those involved in serious and organised crime. We know that the work done over the weekend, given what else was in possession of those individuals, undoubtedly prevented a serious offence being committed. So it's that balance in terms of the staff understanding that actually all of the work they do day in, day out is got a preventative approach to it.
Thank you. Chief Constable, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was the point that Matt was making about the performance framework, and obviously with my national hat on as the National Lead for Prevention, it's the conversations that we are having absolutely with the Home Office around a focus on the performance framework, how it links across to the neighbourhood policing performance framework and the release of the problem-solving guidelines, and also the trust and confidence piece that we spoke about earlier. What we're trying to influence is that where we're talking about prevention, we should be looking at the re-offending rates. We should be looking at re-victimisation rates. We should be looking at the demand reduction on repeat hotspots. We're also having the conversation around how we actually demonstrate and understand much better the the benefits of investing in prevention, i.e. what's the cost benefits analysis, because it's really, really limited in policing at the moment. It's much better developed in education and health. So that's where we're trying to influence into government to make sure that we can invest in the cost benefits analysis so we can better articulate to our communities, but also to the Home Office around why we should invest in those areas of business. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other questions then around prevention from anyone? No? Okay, great, thank you, and thank you, Matt, for presenting that for us. Okay, if we move on now then, we're going to come on to Stop and Search, which is a topical issue after today's announcement from the Home Secretary. And obviously Merseyside is a high user of Stop and Search, and this is our opportunity to just see how that is done and some of the outcomes. So who are you going to take us through this? Yeah.
Thanks, Commissioner. So, yeah, we're now going to present data in relation to Stop Search, but just for clarity, during the presentation, I'm going to show you what we refer to as disproportionality figures. Hopefully this will explain once we reach that particular slide. So I'll try and keep it as simple as possible when we get to that particular slide, because it can be confusing. Okay, so if we go to this first slide around volumes. So this first slide shows the volume of stop searches carried out per month over the last full financial year. We have seen peaks in August, November and January, but they are in line with things like force operations and different events. The average number of stop searches per calendar month is around 4,399 for Merseyside Police. We can compare our volumes nationally, and data is available to the public on this, and that's via police.uk, which is a public platform. When we look at that, Merseyside are ranked first in that most similar force group that I mentioned earlier. That excludes Greater Manchester Police, because I think the data for that was unavailable at the time that we looked. But obviously, when you look at police.uk, you will see that Merseyside conducts the most stop searches. When we move on to the next slide, this just represents the volume of stop searches broken down by strand. As anticipated, local police carry out the majority of stops per month, averaging around 2,744, and that accounts for 62%. Before I move on to outcomes, are there any questions, or should I just finish the slides and then there'll be questions? Yeah, no worries. So this next slide shows your outcomes in relation to stop search per month. There's a number of different outcomes we can use, such as arrest, a positive outcome or a no further action. The overall average positive outcome rate for the financial year is 19%. When comparing our results with our most similar forces, so looking at arrests, we are the lowest in our most similar force at 7%. However, there are some data limitations within Merseyside data in that multiple outcomes can be entered onto the stop search form, and the data trawl only picks up one option. This is being explored further to address. Also, some forces also have some other data issues around blank records, for example, which again is looking to be rectified. When comparing no further action results with our MSF, our rate is around 80% financial year. This is the highest in our most similar force group, but when you look at our most similar force group, all are above 70% for that particular outcome. Okay, so moving on to youth stop search. So this is your graph that shows youth stop search by month and by age category. So over half of all stops with youths were on the age category 16 to 17 years of age, with each age 17 and 18 accounting for around 26% each. Again, if we compare these stops with youths to our MSF, we sit fourth in our MSF in that 16.7% of our stop searches are with youths. The highest is in Northumbria, which has 24%. And please note, this data does not represent intimate searches. That is a separate count. Okay, moving on to youth outcomes. So this is a breakdown of youth outcomes from the stop search form per month. It's broken down into three categories: arrests, other positive outcomes and no further action. The average arrest rate for the 12-month period was 4%. The average other positive outcome rate for the 12-month period was 10%, and the average rate for the 12-month period was 85%. Again, we've looked at our national group, and Merseyside ranks atop amongst our most similar group for the NFA rate amongst those under 18 at 85%, followed by Cleveland at 81%.
Sorry, Amanda, before we go on, can we just, we probably have got a couple of questions on the other slides, if we could just cover some of those.
That's fine.
John, did you want to ask your question?
Sorry. Yeah, could you just explain a little bit about why you would stop and search someone?
Yeah, so there's numerous reasons why we would stop and search. Obviously, there is Section 60 power, which is a power which is we haven't used, I don't think, for probably at least 4 months now within this force, which is a reason without grounds. So if we've had an incident where there's been serious violence within a locality and we have clear evidence or information it's going to potentially happen again, as a preventative measure, we would look to exercise that power, which then means the officers themselves don't have to have grounds to stop and search that person. They are fairly small in number. Lots of other circumstances, whether it be to do with recent incidents somewhere and a crime which has occurred, and you've got information linking that person towards that crime potentially, but not enough to go for arrest. There's information or there's evidence towards drugs and persons acting in a certain way with displaying certain characteristics, or dealing with police officers in a certain way whilst in what they believe are in possession of drugs. Then they would look to exercise those powers, as well as lots and lots of others, the numerous powers in relation to stop and search.
In terms of outcomes, I suppose both for the adults but also youth outcomes as well, there is a very high proportion of no further action. So it's something like 75 to 80%, or there's nothing that follows up from that. Are we, or are you happy as a force that that is an acceptable level? And obviously you said, I think most similar forces, it was all 70% plus, so it's very similar. Are we content that that's an appropriate percentage that we don't necessarily get anything positive out of?
Yeah, I think if you put it into the context around prevention, the point of the stop and search is obviously to actively look to see whether the person's in possession of an item that they shouldn't be in possession of. The fact that then we exercise that power and then don't find anything, I don't think is a negative. I actually think it's a way of preventing further harm. It's also a way to demonstrate to our communities that policing takes that seriously and will exercise that power as and when needed with the right justification. When you look at our most similar force group, yeah, we are the highest, but we're also one of the highest because of previous trials that we've run around stop and search. We are an active user of stop and search when the appropriate grounds are there. So therefore, our staff are probably more confident to use it. Our training is enhanced to be able to provide our staff the confidence to use that power when they see they need to do it.
Jeannie?
Thank you. So I suppose I wanted to just kind of a two-parter really. Can you tell me a little bit more about these serious violence reduction orders and how many we've issued? And I'm interested to see how that will impact on the stop and search figures. And then the second part of the question is around governance. So what governance processes are in place to monitor the stop and search internally in terms of kind of quality and quantity?
Okay, thank you. So serious violence reduction orders, relatively new power, and we are a pilot force for those. So that was built on the back of our approach to serious violence, and we opted to be one of those forces as a pilot area. So they are individuals who are suspected and then convicted of serious violence, possession of a weapon, effectively, to be able to put something on the back of those individuals to control where those individuals or their behaviour, I suppose, or their thought process in relation, do they take a knife out into the street? So we are one of only a very few number. We've led nationally on it. We've now got 4. We were the first force to successfully apply for and be granted serious violence reduction order, and we're also the first force to have a conviction on the back of it, so a breach of that order. What we will then do is proactively look to police those individuals who put our communities at harm by potentially arming themselves and going out. So if anybody then is subject to one of those orders, we will proactively police that order. It then means the officers as well don't need grounds to search that individual. The order itself gives the grounds to search, and that's where it is. Just in relation to, if I move on to the governance around stop search, obviously all stop search goes through a supervisor checklist. So after a stop search, obviously body worn, cameras are activated. It's then subject to scrutiny by their own supervisors. It goes into our training academy for scrutiny there, and when we're looking at developing our packages around training. But then we've also got the number of community-based and public-facing groups, so PEG, MIAG, public scrutiny panels. We gather all of the data in from those. Public scrutiny panel every 6 weeks, every alternative one. Stop search is the theme we go through. So that's how we then monitor that governance.
Okay, thank you. And then I think just a couple of questions on the youth stop and search slides then, John.
Okay, yeah, it sort of follows on from the earlier question, is explain the circumstances in which you would stop and search a young person. And as a bit of a backup to that, how do we compare nationally in terms of the number of children and young people that are stopped and searched in Merseyside?
So if I take the first one, and then I think Man's going to cover the second. So if you look at the circumstances where we stop a young person, it's very similar, if not exactly the same, as when we would stop and search an adult. So the same grounds would need to apply. Officers are cognizant around what trauma that could be placed in relation to dealing with young people, and therefore they do take that into account into how they interact. It wouldn't put them off having to exercise that power because they wouldn't be doing it in the first place, but it's certainly part and parcel of their training. If we think about, the awful circumstances around the murder of Ava White, that was certainly something where stop and search then was absolutely key to trying to prevent individuals and young people carrying knives in our cities or within our communities of Merseyside.
And in regard to your most similar forces, so we currently sit at 4th position. So in that 16.7% of our stops were juveniles. That's defining children and young people as those under 18. Top of the shop is Northumbria, and at the bottom of the table is South Yorkshire at 15.6. Northumbria is at 24%.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
As regards what obviously is quite a traumatic situation for the children and younger folk who don't go on for any further action, what safeguards do you put in place for those individuals?
So it depends on the circumstances of where the stop and search takes place. If, for instance, a young person was brought into a custody setting, for instance, for a drug search, they would ensure that it's the same-sex officers, an appropriate adult would be informed and be present, and it would be in a controlled environment. We would then look at what impact that potentially would have on that young person, so whether the necessary referral would need to be put in place, and how we would look to support it. I suppose stop search in relation to young people can also be seen as a safeguarding action, because if we are stopping groups of young people and we have reasonable grounds to search them, there is something within clearly the circumstances of how they're stopped as to why they've been stopped. So by our action and mitigating that potential to arm themselves, even though they haven't got it then, hopefully that will then put them off in the future, but also will inform their wider peer group of exactly the same.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this weekend across the force has highlighted that in really sharp focus. A 15-year-old youth stabbed over in Caldy, where a group of probably up to about 800 young people have all gathered to celebrate the end of GCSEs. And then we had the incidents I referenced earlier, where 3 juveniles, and they're in possession of a sawn-off shotgun, balaclava and gloves, on their way to undoubtedly some sort of serious offending. So, this weekend, where a number of us have been on duty across the force, those incidents in sharp focus, and it highlights the importance of the preventative element with the right safeguards, that our stop and search approach across Merseyside for a number of years now is seen as being at the forefront.
Chief Constable, did you want to come in?
suppose in terms of, you've obviously got the 12 months worth of stop search data, both combined and then separating out the youths. What would say in terms of what we've dealt with over the past 12 months in terms of 5 firearms enabled homicides, and each of those we had Operation Miller, which is our proactive response to firearms, running obviously for some considerable months in at the end of the summer last year, and then again at Christmas over in relation to the murder of Elle Edwards. And then now developing the Clear Hold Build response, which obviously the first part of the clear is that Operation Miller tactics, and that really clearing out the area. So if you plotted off the number of stop searches for this year and reference what we've dealt with, I think that explains why we are top of our most similar forces. They are always the best comparator to use, but I would fully expect us to be top this year because of what we've dealt with compared to them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So just the last question just on this before we carry on. Amanda, you referenced the exposure of intimate part searches, and obviously that's been quite a high profile issue around Child Q and what we saw in London. Do we know how many times that's happened here on Merseyside?
I haven't got that data with me today, but I can share that after the meeting, yeah.
That would be great, thank you. Okay, if we carry on now then to the next couple of slides around stop and search.
Okay, so this next slide is stop search volumes by aggregated self-defined ethnicity group. Conscious, this is a rather busy slide in terms of numbers, and disproportionality may be difficult to understand. However, I will attempt to explain how we measure disproportionality in as simple way as possible. So firstly, the table to the left represents a breakdown of all stop searches in Merseyside against each aggregated self-defined ethnicity. So for example, 1.4% of stop searches with individuals were with individuals who defined as Asian. The analysts will then calculate the rate per 1,000 population and divide this by the Merseyside population. This will then determine the likelihood of a stop search per aggregated group. Next, we will take the rate per 1,000 population and divide this by the total population of Merseyside, which provides a ratio to Merseyside average, shown in the table to the right. The narrative to the bottom of that slide shows whether there is disproportionality against the Merseyside average. Anything greater than 1 indicates someone is more likely or disproportionality, and anything less than 1 indicates it's less likely. So in terms of latest data available publicly, and using black or other ethnicity category as an example, that shows Merseyside having the lowest disproportionality in this category against our most similar forces group at 1.1. But just for context, South Yorkshire is at 2.5, Cleveland is at 1.7, West Yorkshire is at 2.3, Cleveland 1.7, GMP 2.4 and Northumbria at 1.7. Looking back to 2019 and looking at the position now, we've also experienced some improvements when looking between 2019 and 2023 period, particularly in the groups for Caribbean, African and any other black backgrounds. The next slide breaks it down into a little bit more detail. So it's just using exactly the same principle as the previous slide, but rather than them aggregated ethnicity groups, this slide breaks it down into each of the self-defined ethnicity categories. This gives us a much better picture of where disproportionality may sit. So I know Matt mentioned before PEG, which is the Public Encounters Group. The Public Encounters Group will look at this kind of data and try to understand why there may be differences in different categories. So, for example, on this particular one for B9, any other black backgrounds, for example, this highlights to our force that this is an area we need to understand further as to why that looks disproportionate. Work is being conducted around this, for example, with the Fairness and Policing team, that aims to look at officers' behaviours when they're asking the question, particularly in the presentation of self-defined ethnicity, and how this is recorded or asked at the time. Again, Public Encounters Group or PEG are exploring options to get a better understanding of ethnicity. And again, there are no national comparisons that would be definitively like for like to compare. A lot of forces will assess disproportionality differently. And we've used the latest census for this particular analysis, which did show some shifts, positive shifts, I would say, in terms of the data. But also, there are limitations with the data in terms of who actually fills the census in. Does everyone fill it in? And they're the kinds of things we're trying to understand a little bit more through the arenas such as PEG. The next slide, if you're happy for me to move on, Commissioner, yeah, is just, again, it's just another way of looking at the direction of travel in relation to stop search and the likelihood across each of them aggregated self-defined ethnicities. That black dotted line shows the force average stop searches per 1,000 population. So you can see clearly here what groups are above and what groups are below. Again, it's a type of analysis that allows us to start to identify where there are pockets of potential disproportionality with the aim, again, of understanding why. And then when we move on to outcomes, so this chart shows the ratio of the rate per 1,000 population for each aggregated group compared to the force average, which is a 12-month period. And by way of example, individuals who self-defined ethnicity falls into aggregated group of mixed are 0.9 times as likely than the average Merseyside individual to be stop search. And upon stop search, they are 1.2 times more likely than average to be arrested, 1.4 times more likely than the average to be subject to any positive outcome, 1.4 times more likely than the average to be subject to a linked positive outcome, and 0.9 times more likely than the average to be subject to no further action. So as you can see, disproportionality, it's not just about the stop search, it's about what happens when that stop search event occurs and whether the differences in that, which become more apparent when we look at use of force as well, but whether the differences in outcomes, if there's anything in there that the analyst or the PEG group would look at and say, why is that different? And we haven't got all the answers yet, but we're certainly a lot further than we were a couple of years ago. Okay.
So in terms of that last one then, so it's trying to understand the disproportionality around the initial, or any disproportionality around the initial stop search. And then obviously, is there a suggestion, or is this what you're looking into, around the fact that if there is a higher likelihood of a positive outcome, that then it was a better reason to do a stop search? Or is there a potential that certain groups are more likely to get a positive outcome, i.e. arrest? And could there be disproportionality in that decision as well? Does that make sense?
So it's both, but the second point is more valid, I would say. Are we more likely, under fairness, obviously, and equity, parity, are we more likely to arrest or to have a positive outcome with a aggregated category than we are another aggregated category? And there might be a justifiable reason for this, but they're the kinds of questions we're asking ourselves. Yeah.
So just going back then to that initial, that second slide around the breakdown of stop and search groups, obviously on that one, it was, that one, yeah. Any other background, any of the black background was particularly high with 5.4. And then obviously the Gypsy Traveller communities at 3.5. So is there anything in particular that the force is looking at to address those particular groups? Or do we understand why those particular groups are there?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. First thing, I suppose, to go backwards slightly is how officers are recording it. So even though being self-defined, officers we are finding, certainly out of some of the feedback from PEG, is trying to be helpful and demonstrating how they will define themselves to give somebody an indication. But sometimes the individual that are stopping doesn't understand and doesn't know all the categories available. So some of that data might be skewed, and that's why we're working on that from feedback from PEG in relation to that. And then in relation to then how we deal with that, obviously, to mitigate anything that is unconscious bias or anything in relation to the officers. Obviously, the new Hydra exercise takes into account what's our feedback. All officers receive anti-racist training, and we're enhancing that approach. And obviously, the police race action plan ensures that obviously we don't over-police certainly our black communities. So we are along the way with each of those pieces of work.
I know as well the next meeting we are going to be doing a focus on the police race action plan as well, so I'm sure we'll come back to some of that. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to add on, of course, then it's the overlay of the data in terms of the context of the force. The Chief referenced the fact in terms of, you know, some of the high-profile incidents that then we've had responses to, and we put in enhanced policing into certain areas because of certain incidents. That feeds in on a daily and a weekly basis in terms of how the force assesses its threat, harm and risk, and then how we allocate our level 2 resource to pulse into those areas. It'll certainly feature across in terms of some of the serious violence areas that we have got ongoing directed work in, as well as then the like I say, the level 2 resource that we pulse into certain areas to deal with issues. So it's that contextual information that goes on top of this, rather than just simply looking at one set or two sets of data.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. I mean, we focus quite heavily on the use of effective stop search in terms of serious violence. It is absolutely an effective tool. I think it's just worth noting it's also a really effective tool for serious acquisitive crime. So particularly when we look at our robberies and other offences, burglaries, for example, effective use of that overlaid with burglary statistics and our hotspot areas. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other questions from colleagues around the use of force bit? No? Happy? Okay, right, if we move on to use of force, and then we'll have a quick break after that, if that's okay, Amanda. So use of force.
Thank you, Commissioner. So this next slide provides a picture that shows the volumes of use of force forms completed by officers over the last few years. The volumes and narrative obviously are shown on that slide, but also to note that there may be more than one use of force form completed for an individual incident, and we do attribute some of the increases to better recording by officers, because there's been a drive on that through, again, the PEG arena. So I don't intend to go through all of that narrative on that slide, but that just gives you a bit of an indication in terms of, obviously there's an increase in trend. The monthly average is 916, and we've had a few peaks. 2022 at the highest December figure, but following on from what the chief officers have said, that will be in relation to increases in crime, serious violence, things like that, where we've upped the use of force as a tactic. When we move on to the next slide, so this slide shows a summary of some characteristics of those individuals who were subject to use of force in the 2022-23 period. Primary conduct of the subject, age band of the subject, and the subject gender, they're all listed. Only once for each subject on each form, therefore each value is as a proportion of the total use of forms completed. However, there are often more than one impact factor listed, and the count in this chart is of the total listed, and therefore this is a percentage of far higher than 10,996, which was that total. And just for some further information, the most common combination is alcohol and drugs, followed by alcohol, drugs and mental health.
Sorry, Amanda, before we move on, can we just clarify exactly what we mean by use of force so people understand what it is and when it might be used?
So, Commissioner, this is generally, or will only be, physical contact, but it may also be TACCOM. So when we get to a point where we need to, rather than just a conversation with somebody, take it one step further to de-escalate the situation, officers will then record on a form what that was, and that could range from that lowest level up to and including physical contact, use of personal protective equipment, parva or firearms. So it's the full spectrum which is included within use of force.
Thank you. So on this slide around use of force subjects, when somebody presents with acute behavioural disorder, what measures are put in place to address this person? So how are officers and staff trained to identify what those disorders might be? How can we differentiate between mental health and really what is an acute behavioural disorder?
So we've every officer receives personal safety training every 12 months, and that's refreshed. That training has a specific element around ABD to increase the awareness of officers, knowledge of it. Obviously, we've had incidents in this region where people have suffered with ABD, and have done even as recently as last week with police officers interacting with them. Through that enhanced learning, the officers now are much more aware of that as an incident. Obviously, they've got the issue of public safety, so they have to try and manage both the health well-being of the individual, but also the well-being of the community within that setting. And then how they deal with the incident is determined as part of their training now. So we are far more aware of it as a force, but also the measures we can take then to mitigate the threat and the risk to that individual through our own activity.
Okay.
Thank you. So this next slide provides a demonstration of contextual information relating to officers, or officers who are using use of force. So you can see the breakdown here by age band, length of service, time since the personal training has taken place, and finally what their main duty is. So for the length of service chart, the biggest difference in proportion compared to the volume of individuals in the force who have had the same levels of service come from those who are between 2 and 5 years in, which is 40% versus 23%. And more than 15 years in is 18% versus 40%. They are also the biggest gaps when looking at only R&R matrix and local policing. For the main duty chart, the other category includes roads policing, dog handlers, mounted, CID, etc. And there were 21 forms submitted where the officer was off duty at the time the force was used. Are there any questions around that particular one?
Say that again, that last bit. 21 forms when an officer was off duty but using force. Why would that happen?
So police officers warranted, so an officer will put themselves on duty at any time. Part of being public servant is that every officer will be expected to carry their warrant card, and should an incident arise whilst they're off, effectively they become on duty again and would help and assist and deal with it. They would then be governed and expected to do exactly what they would do as if they were on duty in uniform.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, please. Are officers who are younger in service more likely to use force than those who've been in the job longer?
Statistically, younger officers are more likely to use force. It's probably worth a note, Operation Uplift, so the increase in police resources over the last few years. Many of our new and younger officers, looking at the profile of those people who come through in Operation Uplift, are then deployed into our frontline response. And that's probably reflective now, or will be reflective of most of the forces in relation to the way our resourcing works. So therefore, we have far more younger officers at the front end, I suppose, and therefore that number would be higher anyway. We are working with those people, even more so in relation to what the training looks like around our communication skills of those younger people, so that those interactions are the best they can be without force necessarily being used.
And then in terms of that slide around personal safety training, how often do we expect officers to complete that training?
That training is now every 12 months, and it's also been enhanced. So I think it's now up to 3 days. There's 2 days specific and then an extra day's first aid. So it's scenario-based as well. So in the past, it was very much a certain type of training, but now the officers are put within scenarios that actually we've looked to enhance and develop from lifetime experiences.
Great. So presumably there's a programme of work to get those people who are 2 to 5 years back onto annual cycle.
Yeah, nobody will have missed it. They're not deployable. So when an officer is effectively sent out on patrol, they have to have a valid personal safety programme in being. And it's risk managed then by their own supervisors. So if there is any issues with potentially a lapse of a course for a week or so because they've missed it for an operational reason. That's risk managed by their supervisors.
So when it says there's groups who have had 2 to 5 years since they've had their personal safety training, is that not accurate then on that slide?
If I've read that correctly, I think that's in relation to their length of service, not the time that they've been reaccredited.
Okay, that's fine. Next slide.
So the next two slides talk about injuries. So this first slide is injuries to individuals who use of force has been utilised on, and the second one is injury to officers. So just looking at this first slide, there's a prompt within the use of force form that asks this particular question. The green bars on the slide, that represents the volume of injuries recorded per month, and the proportion is shown by that orange line there. The table to the right provides a summary of the injury, be it minor or severe. So for the whole period, minor injuries accounted to 978, severe were 13, and that box below just gives a little bit of a breakdown for more context. And the proportion for severely injured is 1.3%. So that's as a proportion of all use of force. And then when you go to the next slide, same principle, but it outlines use of force injuries relating to police officers. So for those incidents where an officer was threatened or assaulted with a weapon, the most common weapon type for both was other, and I'll explain what that is in a second, followed by missile object thrown for assaults, and bladed weapon or object for threats. So there's a number of options within that form. So just for context again, the options that an officer is provided with when filling in that form, these are the options. So bladed weapon, blunt weapon, firearm, missile object thrown, pointed weapon or other. So other can be a myriad of different things that don't fall into them different categories.
Okay, do you need to address your question?
What's the oversight process for people who've been seriously injured after being subject to force?
So every time use of force is deployed, CSD will conduct an evaluation of that, look at the circumstances and look at what's written by the officer and how it's recorded. Where there is a need and it's deemed appropriate, it will be sent into our professional standards department if that's the case, and obviously then professional standards would review it and see whether it then meets a threshold for IOPC. What it's also used for though is our protective training units around, so if it's not met any threshold but actually on reflection isn't potentially the best tactic that could have been used, so there's no issue with the use of force, but maybe the tactic itself or how the tactic was deployed isn't absolutely as it should be, then our protective training unit would speak to the officers and bring them in, refresh them around what that tactic should be.
But just for absolute clarity, every single one of those where there is a serious injury would be assessed and by professional standards, and in all likelihood that would be a mandatory referral to the IOPC as well. So there's governance around every single one of those cases for obvious reasons.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah. Is there a cost implication to the force when a subject is seriously injured?
So I guess yes, there could be, depending on the circumstances of how the injuries have come about, and each case would be assessed on its merits, and clearly, through our civil claims department and civil litigation, then individuals who are subject to any sort of injury, if it was appropriate, then they would have the opportunity to make a claim.
Did you want to ask your other one as well?
Sorry. In terms of the cost to the force for injured officers, is there a cost there? And also, what kind of compensation are officers who are subject to assault eligible for?
So we have a really comprehensive approach to officer assaults. We take it really seriously in Merseyside. We have oversight through our police covenant meeting, where we assess all of the officer assaults for the quarter period, and we have a tactical group working through this. We make sure that after each officer assault, the 7-point plan is implemented, and chief officers have oversight of that when they're goal cover, and often will make contact with the officers as well to make sure that the welfare plan is in place, particularly if it's a hate crime against an officer. Then we offer also psychological support through our increased service through the occupational health unit, and that approach is really comprehensive, because often officer assaults can cause both physical injury but also psychological injury, and our occupational health unit is able to make sure that that twin track approach is taken. So to summarise, we take it very, very seriously. We make sure that any learning in terms of where we can prevent officer assaults is fed into the academy, and the new 3-day training programme, we're hoping that that will help in terms of reduction of officer assaults as well.
Okay, thank you. Next slide.
Thanks, Commissioner. So this next visual shows the different types of tactics used as part of the use of force encounter. The data in this slide represents the volume of forms that were mentioned earlier of the 3 tactics recorded in the graph, namely TACCOMs, unarmed skills or non-compliant handcuffing. But there are a number of different tactic options as shown in the pie chart to the right, and officers may utilise more than one tactic per encounter if the incident escalates. Conscious that the public may not know what all the varying tactics are, would you like a further explanation on them?
Yeah, just briefly, thank you.
So if I just pick up a couple of them, so TACCOMs, that's effectively utilising body language as well as words which are said by the officer to try and de-escalate the situation. That's what's meant by that. Non-compliant handcuffing, so that is effectively a subject, an individual not complying, and the best way to restrain and constrain their movements is through non-compliant handcuffing. Obviously, taser, I think, is an obvious one, but we would also ask officers, and officers do, it's mandatory that every time a taser is drawn, so not even deployed, if a taser is drawn, they will have to fill in a use of force form, and that's exactly the same in relation to PAVA, irritant spray. So just on a drawing of the spray, and effectively utilising that along with TACCOMs to try and de-escalate the situation, again, that would be recorded as it. And then there's lots of other sorts of skills that then the officers are taught in their training around unarmed skills to try and de-escalate without injuring the individual, but being able to manage the situation as safely as possible for themselves and the public. Obviously we have ground restraints, spit guards for individuals who are determined to spit, obviously particularly relevant during COVID. And the risk that was faced by the wider public and officers dealing with people, and the threat then to spit. Obviously, spit guards used there, and then limb restraints. So being able to actually restrain limbs in a certain situation, which is in a safe way to stop individuals hitting and kicking out, which stops them injuring both themselves or any officers or members of the public.
Okay, thank you. Next one.
Thank you. So this slide shows the volumes of use of force forms recorded by aggregated ethnicity, similar to what I showed at Stop Search before. And then to the right side, the ratio to Merseyside average per category. So the caveat, I guess, to this is that the Pronto system, which is a nationally and locally recognised piece of software used in policing to record and access data, until recently did not provide access for the analyst to view self-defined ethnicity, and only the officer-defined ethnicity recording field was viewable. This has now changed. What's also important to point out is that there are around 28 to 30% of our records that state ethnicity not stated. Again, this is something that we are trying to understand a little bit more around through the PEG arena. Of note, the ethnicity options listed under officer-defined options are different from what is available via the self-defined ethnicity options, which again can sometimes confuse the picture. And then lastly, additionally, we do have examples in both use of force and Stop Search of individuals who may have had more than one encounter of either Stop Search or use of force, providing the police with a different ethnicity at each different encounter. And again, that can make analysis challenging.
So despite all of that, I guess the same question, there is a disproportionality in terms of what we have with the data. So what's the approach to try and reduce that?
So that's ongoing. We are currently and continue with our stakeholder meetings to understand the data, but also what our communities, particularly our black communities' concerns are, and that informs then our strategy going forward. Obviously, we are working through the Police Race Action Plan and the training and the 4 distinct key areas directly within our work streams to drive that. We then also have lots of scrutiny internally, I think, which we've talked about a number of those. So our body-worn footage compliance policy, so our officers where they should be deploying their body-worn, is it being deployed, why not, and picked up by first-line supervisors. What does the QA, so the question and answer checklist look like, and the compliance around our supervisors to make sure, again, that our supervisors are supervising people the way they should be. We have from CSD disproportionality monitoring and analysis to tell us those themes and push us in where we need to be, and that's then overlaid with our PEG data and the feedback from PEG. So we've really got a rich picture then as to where we potentially need to develop some more work than others. Obviously, we then feed that into our training, our CPS, our feedback loops, and try and make sure that we address any disproportionality or put it into context of where we are and where we're policing. As the Deputy said before, obviously it depends on the policing scenario at the time and what area of Merseyside we're in and dealing with, because that may skew our figures.
Okay, thank you. Next one.
Okay, and then the last slide for this category, use of force, is your a breakdown of finalised complaints for use of force year-to-date 21-22 compared to 22-23. So both data sets, when you look at full volumes, reflect similar volume. There's just a volume difference of 2 between the 2 different data sets. And of note, finalised may not mean that the complaint was received in a particular month is finalised in the same month. So there are differences there. The finalised element is being used as it shows a better picture than recorded. Sometimes recorded cases can change in terms of allegations, and also it's safe to say that use of force may form part of a bigger complaint, if that makes sense. So that's not just the main complaint, but this is the data.
So in terms of numbers, very similar to last year. We're not seeing any spikes or any rise in complaints or anything. Okay, good. Okay, good. Right. Well, thank you for that. We're going to have a quick 5-minute break just for people to stretch their legs, and then we will be back shortly. Thank you. I need to turn my mic on. Oh, am I getting... Oh, that's fine. Right, okay, welcome back everyone. Thank you for coming back for the second half. We are now going to be moving on to discuss mental health, which there's a lot of good work being done. So, Amanda, are you going to talk us through slides? Yep.
Thanks, Commissioner. So this first slide is your mental health 1360 detentions and detentions prevented. So between April 22 to March 23, there were a total of 849 Section 136 detentions. This is compared to 828 for the period in 21-22. And then between April 22 to March 23, 540 Section 136s were prevented by mental health triage. This compares to 573 for the period in same period in 21-22. Section 136 preventers is when our triage officers or nurses have been involved and found alternative pathways for the individual. Would you like me to move on? Yeah.
Sorry, go on. Do you want to ask your question? Go on.
Sorry, just for people who might be watching, can you outline what a Section 136 is?
Sorry, Paul, Mike.
136 of the Mental Health Act is a power used by police officers to detain people in the community for a formal assessment by qualified mental health practitioners under other elements of the Act when they're believed to pose a risk either to themselves or others.
Sorry, I'm just still trying to get my head around all the data and what we're coming on to. So do we know why there's been a reduction then?
There's no discernible reason why there's been any significant reduction. I think there's a bit of a dip. I think that's in February, but no particular reason why that may or may not have occurred.
Okay, thanks. Chris, did you want to ask your...
Please. As regards mental health per se, what percentage of incidents that Merseyside Police deal with have mental health as a contributing factor?
So, as part of the productivity review, which is national project underway, we did a one-day snapshot at the end of 2022, and we found that 14% of all contacts to Merseyside Police during that 24-hour period had mental health as a contributing factor. That has increased. We did that same exercise a number of years ago, and it was at 9% then. So you can infer from that as an increasing trend. And that was just a one-day snapshot. Clearly, on other particular days, it could be significantly more or less. So I suspect the times it's less is probably far fewer.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so this next slide represents 136 detentions from police custody. The data shows that in 2021 there were 61 Section 136s from police custody to a place of safety, and in 22-23 this has increased significantly to 112, which is a 83.1% increase. So them two graphs just compare the two different periods.
Do we know why there's been such an increase?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So I think it's fair to say that our assessment of individuals in custody is at a really high level, and obviously you'll be acutely aware we've got mental health nurse practitioners within the custody suites to identify those conditions. This data here, though, is not in relation to that. It's in relation to those cases where we've not been able to deal with actually that within custody setting, and we've had to go for a 136 because the normal process within custody has not been able to be accommodated. That is, in the local authority not being able to provide an assessment or a bed not being available. So I would suggest that the majority of this is probably to do with wider bed availability. There is an escalation process in place for both of those, and it is really robustly scrutinised. So from a first point assessment, after just 1.5 hours of somebody being in custody, the custody sergeant then escalates that to the local authority. If that doesn't get an absolute response, then it goes to the custody inspector and then to the force duty officer. So very strict control mechanisms to make sure we secure the right support for the individual.
Are you happy, Chris? That's answered your question? Yeah. Okay, next one.
Okay, so this next slide shows the average length of time the police officers remain with patients prior to handover to health staff or Prometheus. We have seen significant reductions in wait time since the introduction of Prometheus in February 2022. Conscious you may not know what Prometheus is, so would you like someone to explain?
So, Commissioner, Prometheus exists. It's an initiative supporting policing by the mental health and acute hospital trusts, where they carry out an observational role on people assessed as medium and low risk who are detained under Section 136. Police still remain with those who are assessed as high risk. It has led to a significant saving in terms of officer time, over 120 hours of officer time per month, which is obviously we can then reinvest into other policing activity. The funding for this will continue at this point. We have commitment to the end of October, but what we would obviously want to achieve is a long-term commitment to this piece of work, and we are working with the mental health and the acute hospital trusts to do that. If that funding does cease, then we would clearly hope to see other models of working to pick up what would be left in its place. But there are weekly meetings to work through this and come up with those solutions. You will have heard of right care, right person, so that's one of the main issues we will focus upon. There's clearly some national directive around that, a national lead for it. And obviously we are working towards when we detain under Section 136, the aim is for police officers to be released within 1 hour of the detention to allow us to then divert to other duties, policing duties.
John, do you want to ask yours? No.
Oh, that one. Yeah. Sorry. Just looking at the data, I always get confused when I see zeros. Are they actual zeros? And if they're not, could we take them out and not skew the data?
So I think the issue where it says 0, is that because there were actually officers who walked straight in and there was no waiting, or is it because nobody was ever taken there, and then does that affect the average?
Sorry. I would have to confirm that because this isn't my data. It's come from criminal justice, but I assume it's the second. So it's where officers have turned up and gone straight in and dealt with it. But I will confirm that just to validate that data for you.
And then in terms of looking at the numbers then, do we know why? I think, is it Whiston and Prenton are particularly, they've not significantly improved since last year, because obviously we did look at this in detail last year. So I think Whiston and Prenton are the ones that don't seem to have made much progress. Do we know about the specifics, Paul?
Yeah, Commissioner, well, actually, the 136 suite at Whiston is actually one of the quicker ones. They will deal with exclusively or mainly high-risk cases, because we don't stay with the low and the low and medium risk cases, because it's a mental health facility. For the Prenton suite, this has now been used significantly more, and this will form part of the new model approach for health trust dealing with patients once Prometheus finishes at the end of October, including them identifying resources to allow it to open more often. So no significant concerns in truth with those particular locations.
Okay, thank you. You have yours? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Next one.
So this next slide talks about mental health working in partnership to tackle availability of mental health. This is obviously a topic covered in our response and resolution healthy organisation monthly meeting. I'm just going to hand you over to Mr White to talk it through.
Yeah, thank you again, Commissioner. So in terms of working together, working in partnership with mental health trusts, obviously they have responsibility for the availability of the mental health beds. We have, in conjunction with partners, an escalation procedure around section 135, 136. So that's implemented by our force duty officer, and then they can escalate that to bronze, silver or gold managers within the relevant trust as appropriate when there's a delay in identifying a bed is experienced. And those relationships work, they are positive, and we will, we have absolute reassurance that they deal with those issues wherever they can, whether they're escalated. We have a mental health police liaison officer. They will review any bed delay on a daily basis, and then if there's a requirement to escalate to health colleagues, then we will do that, and then we can look to problem solve those particular issues. There's a monthly multi-agency meeting with key partners to discuss the 136 detentions and any associated issues that come with those. And there are still occasional delays in police custody in finding a bed for patients who've been detained. That can result in a patient being detained 136 and then conveyed by police from custody to a place of safety. I'm not sure if is there anything to add from a custody perspective, Zoe?
Jeannie, you want to ask him?
Thank you. Just a quick question on that. It's partnership working is key to, reducing the impact on any service, really. But what improvements specifically have you seen being made by working in partnership, and what impact has it had on the resources needed by Merseyside Police to enable you to effectively deal with mental health issues?
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I agree entirely that the solution to this is in partnership. Certainly not one single agency will have a positive impact on its own in dealing with it. So I've talked about the documented escalation process, which is signed up to and agreed by the Mental Health Trusts. And when there's been delays in identifying the mental health beds, this means there is contact at bronze and silver and gold level, and that's done through our force duty officer. So we've got a duty officer on duty 24/7, and that has seen reductions in the time it takes to move someone to an appropriate bed. And once we hand over an individual Prometheus, then any delays are then dealt with. They then manage those delays rather than the police, and then they liaise themselves with the hospital trust. So I think there's two elements there that we've seen particular improvements on in recent times.
Okay, next slide.
So this next slide relates to mental health suicide risk. It includes the suspect suicide data for February 22 to January 23. Just of note, we only started capturing this data in 2022. This is suspected as only Her Majesty's coroner can declare death a suicide, and it's important to recognise that suicide is not always mental health related, but this bar chart just provides the volumes per month since February 2022.
And do we know if any of these are linked to domestic abuse incidents?
We have some data, Commissioner, in relation to that. So in terms of the total numbers of suicides with domestic elements, that's either as a victim, as a suspect or as a witness. So April 22 to April 23 there was 44. Sorry, start that again. April 21 to 22 there was 44, and April 22 to 23 there was 29. So it's actually shown a reduction. But I think there's some just some mitigation over some of the data, just to be.
Do we know if this is something that we're looking into in a bit more detail? But I think potentially as part of the Borg work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll continue to work with the coroner to obtain that data and then bring it to yourself in a sort of meaningful
Great.
pattern.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this one? No? Okay.
So, Commissioner, these last two slides on the, mental health, the first one is around mental health triage cars, and the second one relates to training for staff and officers. So I believe Mr Weiss is just going to talk you through them.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. So I think you can see the slide there just gives a schematic of our mental health triage provision. So obviously Inspector, Sergeant, and there's 3 mental health triage cars who work on a daily basis. So each of those cars works 7 in the morning to 1 in the morning, 7 days a week. Each trust provides mental health nurses to work alongside our triage officers. And then the triage cars will deploy to mental health incidents either in person, via telephone, or an incident log update. Current staffing is 1 inspector, a sergeant, and 12 constables. And it talks there around the different ways in which they deploy. So the face-to-face visit shows that on that occasion, a triage, patrol, and a nurse have attended the incident together to deal with the patient in crisis. Then there's the telephone. So that's dealt with via the telephone after consultation with the nurse health records. And then finally the log update, that was an occasion where there's no deployment required. Some advice is given and that was deemed sufficient to manage the incident effectively. I suppose it's just to highlight the benefits. The nurse practitioner has access to the individual's medical records and identify the most appropriate support pathway to be taken to help the relevant individual suffering from that mental health crisis. They will then provide advice to police officers attending the calls where mental health is a factor, and this ensures there's consultation before a police officer considers the use of their powers under 136. So in effect, all avenues are considered before police act and use their power under 136, ultimately to give the best level of service to the person who is suffering from that mental health crisis.
So this goes back to the first slide we looked at then in terms of the Section 136s that have been prevented by triage. So that's this team with the suggestion that actually we might have seen almost double the amount of Section 136s if we hadn't had this team in place. That's what we're suggesting with the data, that's right.
I think what we're saying from the data is that what police officers can detain under 136, but often because we have the advice and support from the mental health practitioners that they were able to prevent that happening. Actually, was a better pathway for that individual. So yes, that's correct.
Jeannie?
Thank you. I mean, it's quite clear. I mean, I've actually seen one of these in action as well with somebody that I was supporting, and the triage cards are excellent. But how long have the NHS committed to funding those triage cars for? Because they are an invaluable service and they're clearly doing a great job.
Absolutely, it's an ongoing commitment. Obviously, it's not necessarily a financial commitment. It's staff. So I suppose it is in effect. But in effect, we've got a mental health nurse practitioner. We'll provide a police officer. It's an indefinite agreement. I think we all agree it's absolutely the right thing to do, and long may it continue. And we believe it will do.
Okay, next one.
Mental health training for staff and officers, Mr Weiss.
Yeah, thank you. So that slide there just gives a bit of an overview of some of the training that we provide to our staff in relation to mental health. It's absolutely key that we do that and critical in terms of providing the best level of service we can to the public. So an awful lot of training ongoing. So in terms of the initial police training, so initial officers' initial stage of training, they get a full one-day input around mental health as per the College of Policing learning objectives through the university. And they also receive a one-day input from the academy in relation to their powers, signs and symptoms, and then how the triage car is used and implemented. PCSOs also get, as part of their initial training, they get a mental health input and as part of the vulnerability module. New contact resolution officers in the FCC, they get an input on mental health and suicide including signs of both and knowledge of Section 136 powers. And then dispatchers also receive training around mental health and an input from the triage card during their initial training. Custody staff receive a half-day input from the Merseyside Criminal Justice and Mental Health Liaison Team. That's delivered by the Criminal Justice Mental Health Learning and Development Team from Mersey Care. So, and then any updates and changes to legislation or processes for existing custody staff is delivered by the Trust as part of a CPD day. There's an e-learning mental health package and how it relates to the police. That's completed by all police officers. The Academy have recruited a force training evaluation officer who's reviewed all the mental health training, along with Hayley Sherwin, who is our mental health liaison officer and a subject matter expert recognised nationally. And some of that has been updated to make it more relevant to our staff on Merseyside. And there's also bespoke training for the likes of our force duty officers, our inspectors and sergeants in response and resolution about specific powers and the roles and responsibilities they have in dealing with mental health.
Okay. Do you want to ask your questions, or I don't know if they've been answered? Chris? Yeah, you both happy? Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Right. So mental health. We're moving on now to antisocial behaviour.
Thanks, Commissioner. So, yeah, next section is antisocial behaviour. I'm just going to start with giving you a bit of an insight into volumes of antisocial behaviour on the first slide, and then I'll hand you over to Mom Thornton. You'll talk around the action plan and some information around the immediate justice pilot, if that's okay. So, starting with the performance slide, you can see the graph in the table there. That graph shows the last 2 financial years of recorded antisocial behaviour. Between the 2 financial years, there's been a drop in incidents recorded, financial year 2022-23, and that's due to the emphasis for the force to start recording certain antisocial behaviour incidents as public order. The drop in antisocial behaviour incidents from March 22 onwards is mirrored by an increase in public order recorded crime as well. So historically, the force has experienced seasonal trends in terms of antisocial behaviour incidents, most notably in the summer months. Operation Brookdale, which is the Scousers, and Halloween Bonfire Night, which we refer to as Operation Banger. However, due to the change in recording antisocial behaviour instead to public order, we are unlikely to see such increases as in previous years. Are you happy to move on to the action plan, or are there any questions around that?
So, sorry, that bit you just said about, did you say there was an increase in public order offences?
There's been a change. When I say a change, there are a number of public order offences that sit within antisocial behaviour. They've now been taken out of that and recorded as crimes, public order crimes.
So that's
so you'll
partly
see a decrease in antisocial behaviour and an increase in public order being recorded.
So it's not necessarily that antisocial behaviour is necessarily going down. It's partly because we're recording it better.
Different,
yes. And we're actually recognising where there are crimes.
Yeah.
Okay. What about in terms of reporting? Because anecdotally, when you speak to members of the public, they say there's no point in reporting ASB. Is there any work being done to try and promote reporting to the police?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So this is bread and butter for neighbourhood police, and I think it's fair to say. So just to give an overview of some of the initiatives we do to increase public reporting. So throughout the year, there's a series of campaigns, notably Neighbourhood Week of Action, which takes place every January. There's a full 7 days really of promoting, one, the role that we can play, but two, the importance of partners and the public in reporting stuff to us, because without us having it reported, it is very difficult to tackle. So that role of communities as well as partners. We've actually got the ASB Awareness Week coming up in July, a real big focus on that again, about the role of partners, but also what services are available to the public to make it very, very clear what is available. Just to give a brief overview of what that week will look like, so that's taking place the 3rd to 9th of July. First one will be promoting the ASB review, and obviously that's where the Commissioner's role comes into that. There'll be a focus on a Victims' Day, so to get the experiences of victims across the force and how the police have responded to those victims of ASB. The Wednesday will be ASB The Big Conversation, again, just to get it out and alive about the need to actually report stuff through and people's experiences. The rest of the week will also then look at partnership activity, so what we're doing around community events, what we can do with the communities themselves, and then actually one of the days touches quite nicely on the previous update over mental health being a big challenge in terms of ASB. So it's a full holistic week, and we'll have activity across each of the local policing teams for that. But that's just 2 weeks of action. This is day-to-day stuff. So from a force perspective, we engage in Talk About Tuesday, which is all to do with antisocial behaviour, and Walk About Wednesday, where we'll have officers deployed to areas of either high crime, high harm or antisocial behaviour hotspots to engage with the public, with partners, to look at what we can do in that locality. Some of that will be targeted activity from the officers, but a lot of it is about environmental, which takes me to the other thing that we also do is review Street Safe. So you may be aware, well, I'm sure the panel are aware, but for wider, under the VOG agenda, Street Safe went live a few years ago, and part of that is about online reporting anonymously of areas of either environmental or nuisance. So what we do is, we've just talked about the crime figures being reported through, or the incidents, we also overlay those with what anonymous reporting takes place, just to make sure we've got a holistic picture. So that is taken every week to a Tuesday threat, harm and risk meeting at 10 o'clock in every locality, which is also attended to by partners. So a lot of activity really to make sure that we've got a joined up approach, but also that we can look at all evidence bases and data coming in to make sure that we've got a holistic understanding of the demands in each of the areas. The community safety partnerships have a big role to play on this. So again, I will just talk from a Liverpool locality. There is an ASB lead for Liverpool, which is the fire service. And also fire service, we'll probably get to Operation Banger shortly, a real role to play when we talk about Mischief Night and Halloween. Commissioner, if I may, just to give a bit of context over the action plan then, if that's okay, the National Action Plan.
A couple of other questions, I think, on the data, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Just before we go into that. So in terms of, what was it on? John, it was your question.
Yeah, okay. How do we compare nationally for recorded incidents of ASB?
We don't compare that at the moment nationally. That data is not available. However, what I will say is the neighbourhood policing framework are just looking at performance indicators around all aspects of neighbourhood policing, of which ASB is one. So that might come in due course, but at the moment we don't have that data.
Yeah. Jeannie?
Thank you. Just wanted to go back to your partnership work and the targeting of ASB during particular busy periods. So I know from my previous role as a cabinet member for community safety the amount of work that goes on. But I think it would be good for the public to know about some of the specific operations in summer and Operation Banger and what the outcomes of those have been.
Lovely. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. So I'll start with summer because we're heading into that period. We're absolutely well in the thrust of it now. So every year we develop bespoke summer plans in each of the geographical areas. Most of those plans overlap with our high crime, high harm areas, so our serious violence portfolios, of which we've got significant monies attached to those for targeted proactive activity. So we will have polygons, which I'm not sure has been presented to this meeting before, but certain geographical areas where we can ring fence officers to and actually check they've been in that locality, which is great. The other benefits from the analysis that we've had over that is because those officers are predominantly on foot, so engaging with the public. So the feedback from the public in those areas is really, really positive. Overlaid with that, we will have problematic areas that we all know time off from previous years. So everybody will be acutely aware of the situation in the waterfront a couple of years ago when we had all of the I'm not sure what you describe it, but the blow-up devices at the front, so the fun part, and the activity around that. So it is a partnership approach. We will engage with actually the doctors themselves. We've mentioned the local authority. We've got targeted support that we put into those places. So it's not one size fits all. Going back, though, to Matt's conversations earlier, the big focus on this is prevention, really. So it's getting those key messages out to not just young people. And I have to say that this isn't just about young people. It's far wider. But getting those key messages out about what is acceptable behaviour. The other bit, then, is about promoting what activity and what powers are actually available to us. And we'll get to the action plan shortly. But we've got an extensive use of legislation that we can use. But with the Merseyside, we're really focused on doing it in a proportionate way. So the use of dispersal orders when we feel there's a real necessity to. We've mentioned Section 60, not often resorted to, but if we need to, absolutely we'll activate it. But the big focus is also about sharing what partnership legislation is also available. So from my perspective, engaging with those local authorities, registered social landlords about their areas of responsibility too, particularly when you talk about neighbour disputes. which hopefully will be rectified in the new legislation if it does go through, and we'll get to that in a tick. So bespoke plans in each of the areas for antisocial behaviour. Beach Safe runs every solitary year. Obviously, we've had the instance at the weekend over at Wirral. That will be debriefed, but we do look at level 2 resources when we need to bolster those resources on the beach. And in terms of other hotspot locations at the moment, I can't tell you that there's any significant ones across the area. If you look at our force this year compared to last year, the balance across each of the geographical areas is pretty consistent. So probably not a surprise to say that the majority of incidents, because of the size of Liverpool, do form within Liverpool. That ranges between 34% to 37% of antisocial behaviour calls for the force. The rest of the areas, just for context, Wirral between 25 and 26%, Sefton quite low, 13%, Knowsley 10 to 13%, and St Helens very static at 14% of all calls for service in relation to antisocial behaviour. That doesn't mean we only focus on central though, so each area has a local policing team that will deal with the plans in those bespoke areas. Operation Banger then. Operation Banger is our response to the Halloween period. Obviously, it always coincides with half term, which is really helpful too. I think suffice to say that the planning for Operation Banger has already started for this year. It is a full-scale force operation, which normally takes place over 3 key nights, being Mischief Night, Halloween, and Bonfire Night. Not interestingly, for this year, it's actually 4 nights because it falls at a weekend, so extra resources required for this year. And that operation starts off again by way of looking at prevention. So what our key messages we're getting out, predominantly within schools, I think it's fair to say, over Mischief Night, but not exclusively so. But a big focus again on partnerships, and this is one that we really this year need to focus on. Last year we had quite a few impromptu bonfires being set up, and the ability to remove combustible items was a bit of a challenge, I think it's fair to say, because of the date in which it fell. So that's one big focus for fire service this year, working with localities. Fly tipping, which hopefully the new legislation will address as well, is a big issue, without a doubt. And what we had last year was a number of people taking an opportunity to go to community event bonfires and actually fly tip in there. Very difficult for the local authority then, because if it's combustible items with other items, how do you then safely remove? So part of our plans this year is how do we have an absolutely rapid response to be able to deal with that, particularly now it's over the summer period. In terms of last year then, it was a 3-day operation. Interestingly, actually, we talk about Mischief Night as not national. Come over from America, it seems to be, or was, up until last year, our key demand night. Now, in fairness, it still is. However, we did notice quite an increase at Halloween itself this year. So whilst the figures were commensurate and, in fairness, reduced from previous years for the other 2 key nights, Halloween actually increased. So I think there's a bit of lesson to us, not that we sat on our laurels last year, but this is a serious operation which requires resources attached to it, both police and partners, and a full silver command we have in place. So we have a chief inspector over that for the full 3 days as well. And I say it's a full-scale force operation. There is always a full debrief over Operation Banger as well. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay. Lots going on. Chris, do you want to ask a question?
Please, with working in both domestic abuse and mental health, at any given time I can have a number of clients who are having something going wrong, either with neighbours or protective things within domestic settings. So can you describe how you deal with domestic antisocial behaviour, and also how your partnership with housing providers and how you work together to obviously tackle antisocial behaviour within properties?
Absolutely. So every area has its own bespoke performance meeting in relation to all performance, antisocial behaviour being one. So within that meeting, we look at high demand generators. We also look at high risk domestic abuse victims, repeat victims, and also repeat antisocial behaviour victims. So we've got a holistic view of who those individuals are. We then also look at what's the partnership approach attached to those, and that's normally done at a neighbourhood level, so the neighbourhood inspector. Registered social landlords play a key part. So we are hoping, and I'm saying I am hoping that when the changes come in from legislation, that some of the powers that we've got available to us can actually be extended to registered social landlords, particularly in relation to closure notices. Not that I expect them to have to actually expedite them, but that threat of a closure notice in relation to a neighbour is very impactful for registered social landlords. So at the moment we've got the power to do that, and we do use them. But that will hopefully be extended to registered social landlords. But part of this is about tenancy conditions, making sure that we're holding people to account and looking at referral into relevant services as well. off the top of my head, in terms of domestic abuse, and you're talking about kind of problematic neighbours as well, aggravating situation with domestic abuse. Yep, so obviously we've got the Commissioner's victim support network in place, whereby those referrals will go in to provide more holistic support around an individual. So the officers on the ground are fully aware of all of the services available to them and making sure that is in place. Investigations, then we also link into investigations to see if there's anything else from a neighbour perspective that we can wrap around a domestic abuse victim too. Because appreciate and have a problematic neighbour on top of domestic abuse makes a very bad cocktail. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was just to clarify on that, the question really specifically relates to neighbour disputes rather than domestic abuse. In the terms that domestic abuse is quite a separate issue.
Right.
So, no, it's I think it's the way that we label things is often sometimes confusing. So you hear that word domestic and So I think if I know a good example would be persistent smoking of cannabis in a garden, which is causing a domestic ASB because the neighbours on either side are really struggling with that. It's quite low level, but actually for the people who are living next door to the person who's smoking cannabis throughout summer in the garden, it makes their life an absolute misery. So it's low level, but how are we working with housing providers to tackle that? Because it can be quite a tricky issue. If they're not tackling it through a tenancy perspective, where does that leave you in terms of managing it?
Get you. So this was actually raised at a Liverpool ASB meeting not so long ago, and was actually referred through in part to, from public health perspective over the amount of cannabis use in a domestic setting. So that has actually been referred through from that forum. The main part of this is around mediation, isn't it? Because some people actually don't really appreciate the damage in which they're causing within their own parameters. So we would have joint visits with police and the registered social landlord to have those conversations, and hopefully mediation works. If it doesn't, do you know what? There are other powers available to us now. What I don't want to say is that we want to execute warrants for domestic cannabis ownership, but if there is a bigger intelligence piece around it and we think there's something more than that, then clearly there's the opportunity to do that.
So then the last question just on this bit was around one we had from the public, which we obviously get when we put the request out, and this was quite a specific one around parks and antisocial behaviour in parks, and this resident's particularly highlighted Victoria Park in Tranmere, and she's suggesting that many people are scared to go into the park after 4 p.m. because of the groups that are congregating there. So I wonder if you can make any comment about that specifically.
Yeah, so I've engaged with Matthew Moscrop, who's the local police and superintendent for that area, and actually that local area itself, we've only had one antisocial behaviour call for the whole of May. So it's not viewed as a particularly problematic area in terms of public reports. However, clearly the member of the public has reported that through, so we will look to give some additional attention to that locality just to gauge if there are any issues that we are not aware of. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next slide then.
Okay, so I think the next slide contains the details of the antisocial behaviour action plan. So just a few bits for context on this. So clearly the government are really driving the antisocial behaviour agenda. I think it's something that's possibly been on the back foot for a couple of years, but it's come to the fore this year, possibly in relation to post-COVID behaviour, which I think is fair to say it has changed the landscape in terms of antisocial behaviour. What people view as being acceptable. That document is not obviously on here, but it is available for viewing, some 41 pages with 81 discrete points within it. The real focus on it is around making sure we've got tougher punishments for antisocial behaviour, that we are working with communities to make them safe, that we are building local pride, and there is reference at the top of those slides to clear whole bills. Certainly within Merseyside, that's absolutely something we are doing. One of the strap lines for clear whole build is love where you live, so that building of local pride. The other focus links in with the prevention agenda over prevention and early intervention, improving our data quality, and we've discussed that already in relation to public order and antisocial behaviour, and then overall accountability for action. So the focus is we give people the service that they deserve. That's down to our initial response to those incidents, that we utilise law to our best effect. So from Merseyside, we started 12 months' worth of training in relation to the neighbourhood policing framework, of which day 3 is targeted activity. So do we know the assets available to us? So when we talk about closure notice, PSPOs, CPNs, sorry, loads of jargon there, but our effective armoury of how to deal with antisocial behaviour. Are the staff confident to do it? Have we got the legal expertise to do it? And then providing the agencies with the tools they need. So earlier on this year, there was a consultation that went out to all community safety partnerships around the current legislation that's in place, and offering some options for whether some of that legislation would either be extended to partners or extended in terms of timescales. So some of those things under negotiation at the moment are the length of time we can have a dispersal order, length of time we can have a closure order, who has power to run PSPOs. So at the moment that's local authority led. Do we want to extend it? And I've mentioned closure notices already, whether we want to extend that to registered social landlords. So a raft of legislation hopefully will be updated in due course. The challenge with legislation, and it's like public order legislation as well, you can have the armoury, but you need the capacity to be able to look at it. So certainly from a neighbourhood perspective, we've mentioned that training. There will be also, if that legislation does come in and the changes for us, there may be a bit more of a stretch on our own legal departments, which we're in consultation about.
Great, thank you. Next slide.
Okay, so I think the next slide has got the details of two of the initiatives that are being rolled out nationally. One is hotspot policing. It would have been lovely for us to have the money for the hotspot policing, but we have got it for Operation Grip, so I don't want to be greedy. Yeah, we do have quite a bit of money.
We do want to be greedy. We need the funding, and I have made this point to the Minister that we also want some money for this as well, and I've been assured it's coming. So,
so you'll see the forces there that have been given money for hotspot policing. I will go back to the serious violence work we're doing. We do exceptionally well on hotspot policing, so even though we're not one of those pilot forces, we are looking at expanding that methodology beyond the high crime, high harm areas to antisocial behaviour areas that may not meet the existing polygons I spoke about earlier. The other then initiative that we have secured, albeit I'm not sure whether we applied for this or we just got given it, but anyway, we've secured it, is the Immediate Justice Service pilot, which takes us to the next slide, if that's okay. So, Commissioner, obviously this is a pilot that is well and truly understood by the Commissioner because it's led by your team. So the plans is that anybody who's found committing an antisocial behaviour incident that is not a criminal, and we have to be clear on that, not a criminal incident, that we look to make some reparation within a certain period of time, which is 48 hours from that initial incident. And that's so the public can see something tangible has happened in relation to that call. So no go live date at the moment. There's been a series of meetings, one just later on last week, which has involved criminal justice and my team from a local policing perspective to look at our referral mechanisms in. And at the moment, work is underway to commission a service that will do that restorative justice practice. So hopefully that will be in place by the time we get to the summer holiday period. If this is a success, then there is no reasons why this isn't something nationally that would be looked to be rolled out. For me, a real positive. The challenges is identification. The other challenge on this is to do with the fact that it doesn't involve young people. And whilst I'm not saying antisocial behaviour is all to do with young people, clearly there's a proportion that does involve young people. But this is a pilot, and if it's successful, it may roll out further. So, okay, thank you.
John, to ask your question.
What I'm interested about with this is, do you have the resources to implement this?
So from a police perspective, I don't think there is much of a resource requirement on ourselves. We just need to make sure our referral mechanism into the PCC's office is correct. The issue will be to the commissioning arrangements at the other end and whether that's resources are sufficient. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. No more questions on that one?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Zoe. If we move on now to cover finance. Amanda or Keith, are you going to take us through the slide? Keith.
Thank you, Commissioner. So the force finished the financial year 22-23 in a really strong position. Overall, the force itself had a £5.8 million underspend. This was predominantly down to delays in providing funds for the operation uplift. That's not to say we didn't provide the right funds, it's just we didn't allocate them out until we were sure we knew where they were going to and where they were required. So we took a very prudent and cautious approach to that, and we believe that's the right approach. But all those funds have now been allocated out, and we expect over the next 1 to 2 years they'll be fully utilised. The other part is a good news story, because we actually got another £1.7 million additional income through the Proceeds of Crime Act, and so therefore that's a result of the investment that you're aware of we put in there a couple of years ago, and that's really paying dividends now, along with the increased activity through the Encryptophone and other actions as well. So a really good news story. Those funds aren't wasted, they're put into the reserves, and they'll be used, as you're aware, over the period of the MTFS, or kept in reserves for investor save. So really good position for us to be in. Okay. And then the next slide just relates to our capital scheme. You can see there's a fairly significant underspend, but that's down to some delays with our estate strategy. As you're aware, we've been working on that to make sure that it's fit for the future and things. So we're now in a position, as you're aware, close to signing that off. And so we expect to fully utilise those funds in future periods. There's also, it's worth noting, the continued delays in vehicle supply. We're working around that, working with manufacturers to get around that as well, along with Blue Light Company Limited, the National Procurement Agency. So we feel in the next 1 to 2 years we'll start catching up and really increasing that. So that will come right in the short period.
John, do you want to ask a question?
Sure. There's 2 questions, but I'll ask them both together because I know you'll be able to handle it. What is the savings requirement for Merseyside Police over the next few years, and how will you be identifying the savings for the next few financial years, and how will you ensure that these savings are realised?
Okay, thank you. So over the MTFS, the medium-term financial strategy or plan, we've got a 15.3 million savings requirement. That's over 5 years. The larger targets kick in year 4 and 5. That's the way we've designed it. So we're giving ourselves 3 years, in effect, really, of smaller targets in order to make sure that we can achieve that full amount. Transformation savings is what's required, and they take time to actually sort of work out, project, implement. So that's why we're giving ourselves a period of time in order to do that. So we're doing it safely and not sort of ad hoc and knee-jerk. So we're making sure we're giving ourselves as much time as possible to do that by utilising resource, and we're grateful for the Commissioner, in supporting of that, and also through savings as well. So we've got a mix of programmes in order to achieve that. The actual savings process itself, we're working up the savings efficiency. We've got a team in place now to do that because it takes dedicated resource in order to deliver that sort of savings. And we're working through those plans at the moment in order to make sure we're fully engaged with the Commissioner and the public before we implement those larger scale plans. Is that, yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions about finance? No? Okay, great. Thank you, Keith, for that. Right, so last bit then we're moving on to is the public questions. So colleagues will be aware we invite questions from the public to put to yourselves since you're in the hot seat. And we've had a few questions come through. So the first one is around what is Merseyside Police doing to strengthen and support the Matrix unit? And you might need to just explain what the Matrix unit is, and armed officers in order to disrupt gangs and organised crime groups on Merseyside. So Paul,
that's me, Commissioner. Yeah, so in terms of the Matrix unit, so that's a unit that comprises our Matrix disruption teams. It does include our armed officers within Matrix, dogs, mounted, roads policing, and a drone unit and other teams. So they all work together to disrupt gangs, organised crimes, as the question indicates. So I suppose the good news is that following the recent force structural review, we will increase the number of officers in roads policing and in disruption. So that gives the force more resilience and proactive capability in relation to targeting OCGs and organised crime. The force priority crime team, who were previously responsible for targeting named offenders and other priority crime issues, they have now been moved from local policing into Matrix. So there's better governance on the targeting of gang and OCG offenders. They can't do that without the right information and intelligence to support that. So information and intelligence sharing from the NCA, ROCU and our Force Intelligence Bureau to ensure the right people receive the intelligence to get the greatest impact on OCG activity, disruption and targeting. We ensure that they get the right education training around latest techniques to both disrupt and also identify vulnerability. We've got really strong working relationship with the county lines teams. So we've heard a presentation from Matt earlier about how to shut those lines down, keep those lines closed, and then target the OCGs responsible for them. We ensure we've invested in some equipment and the technology so they've got the right capability and to keep pace with criminal advancement in crime-enabled technology and techniques. And as ever, it's a one-team approach, so we don't work exclusively on our own. We work with the other strands. And as importantly, we work with external partners to address criminalities linked to serious and organised crime.
Great, thank you very much. Jeannie, do you have the next one?
I'm going to put this into my own words because it was quite technical when it came through. So the question was, now that we've got the non-degree entry route for the police, will those officers on the degree route be given the opportunity to change to the non-degree route? I am saying that right, aren't I? Told you it's quite technical. And really it's for those officers who may not be that academic but will still be an asset to the force.
Okay, so the route that you're talking about is the initial police learning development programme. So the initial police learning development programme in its old format has gone. We are implementing the initial police learning development programme plus. We've got 2 intakes of this, one in July and one in August. So it's important to note that the content of that has changed and it does incorporate elements of our police constable degree apprenticeship as part of the new initial police learning development programme plus. And the initial police learning development programme plus will be replaced by the 4th non-degree route in April of next year. And we are waiting guidance from the College of Policing as to what that will look like. In terms of Merseyside and the academic routes, we have people, unlike other forces in the country, we have people who go on our police constable degree apprenticeship at level 2. So GCSE level, and we put a huge amount of support into those people who may struggle academically, both at with the University for Liverpool John Moores, but also in force as well. And what we are finding is those people who come on at level 2, because of the support that they get, some of those now are going on to get first degrees, but also are operationally credible and good police officers out there in the force, because don't forget, the PCDA, as well as being academically based, is also practically based as well. And the routes are entirely different, so to chop from one route to another in line with the programme just would not be practical. But also as well, it's a problem that we don't need to solve at the moment. We put support in for people who are on the academic routes. Anybody who's struggling is identified early on and a package of support is put in place. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you for that. The next public question then was around fraud and cybercrime and what plans, and again, this is something we'll come back to in a future scrutiny meeting to go into more detail, but broadly what plans are in place to keep people and businesses safe around fraud and cybercrime?
Thanks, Commissioner. Yes, so this is an area of business that has quite rightly been pointed out as a growing area of crime nationally, not just in Merseyside. But Merseyside Police have a robust response around it. For a start, we have financial abuse safeguarding officers, or FASOs, that provide support to vulnerable victims of fraud, such as personal visits, prevention protection advice, bespoke support with helping victims negotiate banking protocols. We've done a series of initiatives in the city centre recently as well, giving out that financial guidance. Some of that work that I've got in front of me now is prevention protection advice and input at the Yorkshire Bank in Walton, fraud awareness event at the Anfield Community Hub. There was a romance fraud awareness at Lime Street Station, as well as close working relationships with Tesco, Asda and Sainsbury's around emerging trends around fraudulent gift vouchers. So lots of work there on the front foot to educate people. Indeed, there's a national phishing campaign at the moment that is launching as of today, that the Met is supporting, and all forces, about raising awareness of how to spot phishing messages, raising awareness around how to report those messages, and then informing the public to make sure we're more aware and alive to those. So we are supporting that, and that opens this week. And then beyond that, we also have a dedicated cyber team who investigate cyber-dependent crime, bring offenders to justice and prevent reoffending, and also a cyber protect and cyber prevent advice for our local communities and local business, how to safeguard themselves against future crimes as well. We've got engagement with schools force-wide, we've got partnership working with local universities and colleges, and we've also got Cyber Awareness Day at Hubert College, and supporting victims of violence against women and girls as well, to ensure that they are best sighted on how they can be ensure they don't become victims of this. We've also got a Safer Internet Day, which is a week of action with face-to-face engagement in junior and secondary schools of over 2,000 young people, again about, rather than dealing with it after you've become a victim, preventing you becoming a victim, which obviously is in line with the force's stance around prevention.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, and the last public question then, John.
Okay. How are offenders on licence managed, and do you have enough police officers in your teams to manage them?
Okay, there's a number of ways in which offenders are managed out in the community. So those who are released from prison on licensed conditions, managed and supervised probation, which is supported by ourselves, obviously. And there's a process where probation are required basically to send the licence conditions to police. And then that'll be entered onto the police national computer. So any police officer who then comes across one of those individuals could take proactive activity if it's determined to do so. That then enables us to work in a really close relationship. We also have bespoke teams to deal purely with offenders and those high harm offenders. So we have an integrated offender management team which work alongside probation to proactively go out and manage the highest risk offenders. And we also have our sex offenders unit who go out, again, real collaborative approach with probation and work with those offenders to make sure that we mitigate their risk going forward. In relation to teams and the makeup of teams, we regularly review that based on some national cohorts. There are guidelines nationally as to what our cohort sizes should be per offender manager, and we put that under constant review.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the members of the public for sending those questions in. And obviously there'll be more opportunities at the next meeting as well. So that's everything on the official agenda. I'm not notified of any other business. Is there anything else anybody wants to flag at this point? No? Okay, great, thank you. Next meeting then is going to be the 18th of September, and we're going to be focusing on the workforce, the National Race Action Plan, and also neurodiversity. Thank you very much.